pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Trustee Gray.
Present.
Trustee Holtz. Trustee Rogers.
Present.
Trustee Suisse.
Present.
Trustee Pazmino.
Present.
Trustee Berrien.
Present.
Mayor Yukich.
Present. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
Mayor, I'd like to move G5 to G2.
G5 to G2. Everyone good with it?
I need a second.
Okay.
Second.
G5 to G2. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
No opposed? All right. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of December 11th, 2019 Village Board meeting?
I so move.
Trustee Suisse?
Second.
Trustee Pazmino? Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of January 22nd, 2020 Village Board meeting?
So moved.
Trustee Gray?
Second.
Trustee Berrien? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the following closed minutes session minutes, all of which shall remain sealed until future board consideration and approval to release? So we have June 27th, 2018, February 13th, 2019, May 22nd, 2019, and June 5th, 2019.
I so move.
Trustee Suisse?
Second.
Trustee Pazmino?
I do just have something to say briefly on it. So these were all reviewed. You guys had individually reviewed them, so I did just give you guys a copy. I would like to collect those copies back before you guys leave today. And that's pretty much it.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Oh, one more thing, sorry. And you'll notice on the bottom of the minutes, it says respectfully submitted by Clerk Ann Holtz. I'm leaving that on there just to, because she had actually typed those specific minutes, and I will sign an additional to it, so,
Okay.
for clarification.
Is there any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, so you have it. Motion carries. Public hearing. The regular meeting will be in recess for the purpose of conducting a public hearing. Is there a motion to open a public hearing to discuss proposed establishment of the special service area number 20-001, Square Goodings Grove in the village of Homer Glen? The proposed levy of an annual tax as described in the ordinance, and hear any protest or objections, followed by considering an ordinance to establish for the establishment of the SSA. The public hearing on the special service area number 20-001, Square Goodings Grove in the village of Homer Glen is open for comments. The public hearing is designed to allow residents to state their opinions and or concerns. It is not a question and answer session. Given that, is there anyone that wishes to comment on the proposed establishment of the special service area?
I so move. I first.
Wait, get a motion first. Okay. Need a motion?
I motion.
All right, Trustee Rogers.
Second.
Trustee Gray. Okay, so. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so then, is there anyone that would like to comment? Okay, then the meeting will be called back to order. Is there a motion to close the public hearing on the special service area number 20-001, Square Goodings Grove in the village of Homer Glen?
I so move.
Trustee Suisse,
Second.
trustee Piazmino. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Now the meeting will be called back into order. Next it goes to reports and communications from the mayor and other officers. The Village of Homer Glen recently began a new initiative to update its branding strategy and improve gateway signage. The branding project will assist the village with identity in the marketplace. The new brand will be unique to Homer Glen, and it will help promote the village and its assets. There will be no change to the village seal. The discovery phase of the project is underway. Our consultant is currently interacting with stakeholders and the public to gather information that will help inform the design of the new brand, and there will be more opportunities to interact in the process. Watch our website and social media for more information. Second, the Village of Homer Glen, together with the Will County Land Use Department Resource Recovery and Energy Division, will host a residential hazardous waste drop-off event this Saturday, March 14th. Drop-offs are to be made by appointment only. The county will be accepting appointments through the morning of March 13th. To make an appointment, go to www.willcountygreen.com or call 815-727-8834. This event is free of charge to Will County residents. Identification will be required. Event flyers are also located on the table by the door if you would like to take one. That would be up by that door. Number 3, Lieutenant Holly will talk about this more during his report, but I do want to address some things that I've been hearing regarding police enforcement in our community, particularly Deputy Toon. Traffic Deputy Toon is doing his job every day to keep the people of Homer Glen safe. The village gets hundreds of speeding complaints every year. Deputy Toon responds respectfully to these requests all over the village, preventing speeding and keeping our community safe. It's not possible if residents start sharing the location of the police, officers, or try to intimidate them. The speeding will just move to a different part of the village. So I ask that our residents show your respect to Deputy Toon, that others that deserve it, as they are hardworking to protect the community. And, you know, I understand people don't like the tickets, but if you weren't speeding, you wouldn't get one. So it's real simple. I ran into one guy at the rally, which I'll get to next, Saturday, and he asked me what I was doing, and I said I came up to talk to Officer Toon, and then he got real smart and said he didn't really like him, but I won't say exactly how he said it. And I told him, why don't you like him? He says, well, I got a ticket. I says, were you speeding? He goes, hell yeah, 12 over. I go, then what the hell's your complaint? You did it. So why are you picking on someone who's doing their job? It doesn't make any sense. You know, we get communities we get calls all the time. They come to the public service and they do the same thing. They want the speeding to get down. Summer's coming around real quick. And what we have to worry about is some of these kids going out there, and especially if you're trying to catch up with where he's at, you're worried about something that you shouldn't be. Just don't speed. You know, they give you a few miles over the speed limit before they would even think about it. But when you start doing 12, 20, 25, and 30, you need to get pulled over, and it's your fault. So I'd like to see if, you know, let the people leave him alone. Let him do his job. Officer Toon really does a very good job. I ask him to do it for the village. I ask him to do it for the village. So he's just doing his job. So let's leave him alone. Second, on Saturday there was a political rally at the corner of 143rd and Bell Road. I want to clarify some of the details about the event. The rally was not a village-sponsored event. The rally was an expression of free speech and was allowed to go on as long as it did not interfere with traffic. Will County Sheriff's Department were present to keep the peace. There were a few signs at the rally that were very disrespectful and beneath the residents of Homer Glen. As a community, we embrace everyone's right to demonstrate and express their political views in a respectful and peaceful manner. And for the most part, they did wonderful. But two guys did have a sign, like I said, it was extremely disrespectful, and that's just not us. That's not what this village is about. So hopefully they understand that they were doing something that was wrong. But they have the power of free speech, so we can just hope that they don't do it again. So next we'll go to the trustees and we'll,
No.
oops, oh, that's right, you went 5-2, it's public safety. We'll go to public safety officials and Lieutenant Holly.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, everybody. Before I really start, you see I'm not clean shaven again, so the Sheriff's Department's participating in a fundraiser for Special Olympics, and as long as we take part in that fundraiser, we can take a break from shaving for a little while, so hence that. As you see, no luck up here, but down here, no problem. Okay, so to make sure I get my statement correct, I'm going to read right from the sheet, okay? The past several weeks, people have been singling out the Homer Glen traffic deputy on social media. Comments have steadily gotten worse, calling his integrity into question, calling him derogatory and racist names, and disrespecting his service in the U.S. Army. How would you feel if your loved one was being treated like this for doing his job? Citizens may think the posting of his location is some sort of game, but it has become a public safety issue. Some people have suggested speeding where he is not located, or purposely speeding to get pulled over so they can take selfies with him. It has also turned into an officer safety issue. It only takes one unstable person who wants to be a social media hero and martyr for the cause. Some people might think I'm overreacting when I say that, but there are plenty of tragic examples where police officers have been ambushed on traffic stops. We believe in and we defend everyone's right to freedom of speech, but with freedom comes great responsibility. Opinions are one thing, but harassment and threats to a law enforcement officer are another, and they will not be tolerated. Too many people believe that what is on social media is the truth, so I want to clarify a few things for you. The traffic deputy is a hard-working human being. He's just doing the job he is contracted to do by the village. He does not write tickets just for fun, and tickets are not being written for 1 mile an hour over the speed limit. Traffic stops are audio and video recorded, so there is absolutely nothing for him to hide. Neither the sheriff's office nor the village of Homer Glen has a quota for tickets, and our ultimate goal is compliance with traffic laws so that children and families are safe in this community. Some suggest that too many tickets have been written, yet others complain that we aren't doing enough to slow cars down. Enforcement is focused in areas where concerned citizens have expressed concerns to us, and also where it is unsafe for vehicles to violate traffic laws due to hills, hidden driveways, bus stops, and the like. Lack of traffic enforcement will inevitably lead to a decrease in safety for the public. Homer Glen is an absolutely wonderful place to live. The efforts of the traffic deputy have not only kept the public and our streets safe, but have also freed up the patrol deputies to conduct active patrol to prevent crime and answer calls for service. This resulted in Homer Glen being ranked the 4th safest community in all of Illinois last year. We must all remember that there is great responsibility for each one of us to help keep this community safe, and activity on social media is a part of that responsibility. Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for all your support, everybody.
All right, we'll go back to trustees. Trustee Gray.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to report that we continue planning Homerfest. Visit homerfest.com to see the dates. The band lineups are starting to roll in. We continue to look for volunteer help if anybody's of a mind or if you have high school kids. And that concludes my report about Homerfest, but I would like to just say, as a former member of the Public Safety Committee, you know, what our first responders do for us is always well appreciated. You know, you guys put it out there all the time. So I would just like the lieutenant to pass along to all of his crew that they still share my support. So thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Trustee Holtz.
Yes, to echo what Trustee Gray said and Lieutenant Hawley's remarks, absolutely, 100%, we're behind him.
Thank you, Trustee Holtz. Trustee Berrien?
Ditto, certainly on Trustee Gray's remarks. And reporting for Community and Economic Development, we had our meeting last night as part of our branding exercises with additional stakeholders. I thought it was well attended, and I think it was a good exercise for everyone involved. I know trustees have been going through it in the last couple of days on our own or in groups, but it was a good meeting with good participation from our committee, and just wanted to pass that along. That concludes my report.
Trustee Rogers?
I will just ditto what the previous trustee said, that being on the Public Safety Committee, it was, exhausting at times. The amount of complaints that we had for speeding, it was very frustrating for us as a committee to try to control it, and we spent a lot of time and a lot of money moving radar signs around, implementing new signage, and it really, when I was on it, it was about 70% of every meeting was speeding, and how can we reduce speeding, and what can we do to do that. So I haven't seen a lot of what you've spoken of, but he is doing what this village has contracted him to do. So I also want to say that I think that there's this notion out there that the village makes money on these tickets, which is just not true. So I think it's important that that be said. But moving on to parks. We have our first Biking into Earth Day event on April 25th from 10 to 3 here in Heritage Park. The goal is to introduce people who are not familiar with the trails. We have some new trails, some extensions that several people probably haven't had the opportunity to ride. So we're encouraging the residents to come out at 10 o'clock. Here at Heritage, we'll give maps out. We're also going to have smaller trails for beginning bikers and tricycles. So they'll just kind of bike around the park itself as opposed to going onto some of the bigger trails. We'll have Orland Cyclery there. So if your bike needs some air after sitting in the garage all winter, they're happy to be here, take a look at your bikes. And I'll let Sharon speak a little bit more to what the Earth Day is doing. So what we did is our committee partnered with the Environmental Committee to have just one event to kind of introduce everybody to spring and to Earth Day and to get people out and get active. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Trustee Rogers. Trustee Pazmino?
Thank you, Mayor. Reporting for the Environmental Committee, Homer Glen has once again been awarded the Tree City USA distinction for 2019. The Tree City USA program has been greening up cities and towns across America since 1976. It is a nationwide movement that provides the framework for necessary for communities to manage and expand their public trees. More than 3,400 communities have made that commitment to becoming a Tree City USA designee, and again, Homer Glen is proud to be a part of it for a number of 11 consecutive years. On another note, it's that time of year again for Homer Glen's Big Tree Contest. The Homer Glen Environment Committee is looking for the biggest trees in the village. Nominations for every species of living tree that exists are encouraged to be submitted. Applications for your tree to be considered are due by May 10th. Also, applications and more information will be available shortly on the village website, homerglenil.org. More great news. The EC recommended that the upcoming fall tree planting be at the site of the future Glenview Walk Park. Very exciting news. And lastly, this falls outside of the EC committee. I am proud to announce that last Saturday at Ruby Agave, the Heritage Quarter Alliance hosted a fundraiser called United for Puerto Rico. The event brought together several local businesses, organizations, public officials, and commissioned fire officials, including Northwest Fire, Chicago Fire, and the City of Chicago. The goal was to raise funds for the transport of an ambulance and a fire engine donated by the Chicago Fire Department, and this is for hurricane and earthquake-ridden Puerto Rico. A special thank you to Mayor Yukich for attending, contributing, and speaking, as well as our Will County Commissioners Steve Balich and Mike Frisolone. Puerto Rico sends a warm hug and a big thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
That concludes my report.
Thank you, Trustee Pasmino. Trustee Suisse.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few comments to highlight what Trustee Rogers was saying about the combined Parks and Environment Committee April 25th celebration. It is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day that week, so we are also going to have some giant kite flying demonstrations, gardening, handing out some tree samples. There's supposed to be a food vendor, and we will in some pruning workshops. So we will have more details in the next couple of weeks, and that will be found on our website as well. And just to mention, Lieutenant Holly, I definitely support you and your staff. That concludes my report.
Thanks, Trustee Suisse. Village Clerk.
I have nothing else but against, of course. Holly, we support you.
Village Attorney.
No report, Your Honor.
Village Manager.
No report.
All right, next would be public comment. Thank you. All right, Joe Novak.
My name is Joe Novak. I live at 15823 West 139th Street. There was a flag lot issued, a variance 2 years ago to the property just east of me. They've never applied for a permit for building. They put in a gas line, and when they were doing this variance, they came to you, and Mayor, you said, your utilities, because there is no easement, are going to run down the middle of your driveway. And he said, there's no problem with that. Since then, there's been a gas line run. The gas line runs on my property. I've contacted the village. I've contacted the gas company. They came out and they apologized and said, yes, it is on your property. At this point, now there's stakes up. The utility, they're trying to get ComEd to run power back there. We've contacted the building department. There has been no permit or nothing has put forth to them. But they're still moving forward with this. Mr. Longo, prior to this, when he bought that property, had moved heavy equipment back there with no permit. We contacted the building department. They had that removed. It's still ongoing. The variance is only supposed to be for 1 year unless they submit a building permit. And it's been way beyond that. When we contact Joe at the building department, he goes, I'll look into that. I'll look into that. I'll look into that. I'm unaware of it. I'll look into that. At this point, they're going to run power back there with no permit. They don't even have a variance. I don't quite understand what's going on. The other thing that they were supposed to do was put in a comprehensive plot to runnage or drainage from what they were going to do with this driveway. They haven't done that. They haven't submitted anything, but they're moving forward with this. I'm exhausted. I don't know what else to do, so I'm here.
Joe?
Yeah, I spoke with your wife a couple of days ago. Mr. Longo did apply for a permit back in 2017 under the variance that was granted. We haven't issued any permit to him because of the additional documentation that we were requesting, and we've never gotten. So we've never gotten a formal permit from him. There's some easement
Questions?
There were some communications with the neighbor next door.
Correct.
From my understanding.
It's not a dual driveway situation anymore. He's run his own driveway. He doesn't want any part of what Mr. Longo is doing. But at some point, is this variance still?
What I can do is I'll stop work on that property, make sure that the utilities do not move forward at this point, and investigate the terms of the variance and what the timeframes of is that, and get back to you or your wife with additional information.
So there's 2 driveways now?
Yes.
And his gas line, and if he ran an electrical line, which...
What he did is he's kind of like an Eddie Haskell. He says one thing and does another. He's run the gas line, and Stevie Wonder can see where the gas line is. It's on my property. The gas company apologized for doing it. What he did is he put stakes up and told them where he wanted it run. And he pulled up the stakes. This property has been surveyed 20 times, and his survey was completely off. When we contacted the village says, we don't get involved in that. So I paid another additional $1,200 to have it resurveyed. And still, this happens. I've repeatedly called the gas company. I can give you the names and the numbers of the engineers that I've talked to. And if you come out there, it's all marked off right now because they marked it off again so that they can put electric back there. Like I said, it's so obvious. It's beyond. I can't even say.
Right.
But we can stop work up until this point to investigate and find out what's going on with the property.
Right.
I know there's been some disputes about the property lines. I've seen numerous markings out there. So we can get that all squared away and find out if that's the situation.
But when did he apply for the permit and when?
2017.
Why am I still here asking these questions?
That was for a new home. Nothing's been built on the property. I spoke with Mr. Longo last week, and he told me that he's just trying to get utilities to the property to make it more marketable.
Yeah, but he's got to do that right. He's got to put it on his property. All right, so...
And the variance for the flag lot is only good for 1 year.
Well, nothing's been permitted on that either, so.
We'll have to go back and check, because usually if it was a platted subdivision that resulted in a flag lot, that runs with the land. It's not, there's no deadline on that. There's different types of variances.
Okay.
But we'll have to go back and check that.
Because at the time of that, when we were going through this, and I've been through it so many times, I can't tell you, but the report that I had was it was only good for 1 year, unless a permit was issued, because that's the reason that Mr. Longo had to come before this group and ask that question.
Okay. All right. Our lawyer wants to address something first, but then I just want to say something afterwards, so this way we're all on the same plate.
With regard to the use of your property for the gas line and obviously staking it out for the other, that is a situation where I would recommend that you should speak with an attorney, because that's a trespass on your property. That's not something that the village can take care of, because it's a matter of the gas company and your neighbor putting something on your property. You can either give him an easement, sell him an easement, or you can have it removed. But I just wanted, the variance we can take care of and take a look at, but that aspect of things is...
My dilemma is
take a look at
not knowing all of this. I would like to put up a fence. And if I put up a fence, I'm going to drill through a gas line. Now, it's not pressurized at this point, I understand that. But what is my exposure to that?
Well, that's what I'm saying, that what the steps I would recommend is you speak with an attorney, because there's a formal process you can go through that shows that there is a trespass on your land, that they've installed this pipe without permission, without the legal right to. They don't have an easement. And so I know that there's a dispute with the property, so I don't want to say it's an ironclad case or anything, but it's a situation.
I understand, I'm not the sharpest pencil in the box, okay? I'm just a guy that has a piece of property, and this is happening. And I'm looking to the village to understand why this has gone on for this duration. And the village says, we don't get involved in this, we don't get involved in this, we don't get involved in this. The frustration point is I've already paid $1,200 to have the plot resurveyed to verify where that's at. And now I have to contact an attorney.
Okay.
I mean, do you understand? I mean, is this? Am I wrong with what I'm asking? I don't understand.
No, if they're going on your property, no, you're not wrong. Joe, tomorrow, let's get something straight. Let's get together with him and let's see if we can get him in the office, get all this stuff straightened out. I just asked the lawyer too on if it isn't pressurized right now.
No, it's not.
All right, so there's a possibility that we can force him to put it on his property. I mean, the pipe down there, if it's in the ground already and not pressurized, make him put another one in. It's going to be a cost to him.
And just to clarify, that is something between the homeowners. I'm not saying that we're not getting involved. The village of Homer Glen, well, hold on a second.
Oh, I know. I'm listening.
When you spoke, okay, when you got your hands up.
What
I'm saying.
The village manager, married 35 years. That's what I do.
The village man, okay. The village manager explained the variance issue and the permitting, the village is going to definitely take a look at that. But with regard to him building something on your property, that is not something the village is involved with.
Well,
it is a dispute between.
He's not building on my property. He's run utilities through there.
That's your property.
When he did come to this meeting, he expressed that you had to be 3 feet off of this property line and 2 feet off of this property line. That only gave you this much distance. Where are you going to run your utilities? And Mayor, you asked that. And he said, you're going to run them, you said you're going to run your utilities right down the middle of your driveway. He says, I don't have a problem with that. But that's what he says. And then this is what happens.
I just wanted to make sure it was clear that the village is not going to be in a position to force him to move that gas line. I just want to make sure.
I understand the village isn't going to do that. My question is at some point, how does the village allow this to happen?
Again, we don't get involved in property line disputes, so we can't use the taxpayers' money to do that. That's a personal issue between you and your neighbor, and that's consistent across any community.
Well, it would be if it weren't the situation of flag lot, that there were moratoriums put in on flag lots, and then there were restrictions put in the meeting here.
Yeah, but it still doesn't have anything to do.
He's violated those, and we're still.
I think you're talking about two separate issues. One is how long the variance that was granted, so we're going to have to go back and check that. Was there a grandfathering on that variance, which I don't know. We'll have to go back and check the ordinance. And if there wasn't a grandfathering on the variance and it was done via plat of subdivision to allow a flag lot, then that runs with the land forever. So it doesn't matter when we issue a building permit, because that's typically the way it works. But I wasn't here at the time, so we'll go back and we'll take a look at what was granted by the village board at that time. But I do want to make sure you understand that we will look into that, but we can't go on your property. We can't tell him that he has to remove it because it's a civil dispute. And that's something that has to be resolved via you getting a survey, him getting a survey, and then ultimately the courts decide that, but it's a civil process.
Okay.
We have a lot of people who complain that people put fences on their neighbors' lots, vice versa, and we don't get involved in those type of complaints. But we will, I promise you, we will look into the variance.
If anybody would like to stop out and just look at the direction of the flags that have been posted now from where utility is at this point, it's, like I said, it's obvious.
All right, well, we'll get Joe to
Thank you
look
for
into
your
it.
time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next would be Don Cooper.
Hello, I'm Don Cooper. I live at 17750 Crystal Lake Drive, Homer Glen. I guess I'm looking to address some of your ordinances when it comes to detached garages. I live on an acre lot, and I'm looking to put a bigger garage up than what your limitations are of 800 square feet. I lived in Homer since '89. The house I lived on, I was on an acre lot, and I had about a 1,300 square foot garage. I think your restrictions are a little off. If I attach the garage to my house, I could literally make the garage about 2,000 square feet. But if I don't attach it to the garage, it can be about 800. I guess I'm looking for not just a variance, but I guess clarity, even with a sliding scale. I have a business in Orland Park. We have a restriction of about 30% landmass, or whatever you want to call it, for drainage. I know Homer Glen has a 30 and they have a 20. If they address it where they use that 20%, that's going to dictate how large of an outbuilding you can have. I'm not looking to put up a pole building, I'm looking to build a building that matches my house. I guess if there's some clarity, or if there's some discussion that can be done about this, because where I live and even where I came from in Homer, there's a lot of guys looking to do different detached garages, and it's one of the reasons I live out here and I don't live in Orland, is because I like the legroom. I guess I think there's some room for movement on the village part. When I was under Will County, I could build it, but now with Homer Glen, I can't.
Well, things have changed, but
Yeah.
have you brought anything to the village?
I haven't. I've been in discussion with Melissa for the last 3 or 4 months, and they've had some things going on, so I've kind of waited until the spring to bring it on. I guess, I don't know if this is something that can be looked at. I think it makes common sense. I mean, if I have a half-acre lot, I can do an 800 square foot, and if I have an acre and a half lot, I can do an 800 square foot building, and I think that's skewed. I think that's off.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Cooper, we're actually, you should stick around because we're having a workshop tonight, and there's a couple of policy direction issues that we're going to ask the board for additional clarification on. This is one of them. So you're very timely in attending tonight's meeting. So we're going to discuss, this is one of the issues we're going to discuss tonight in the workshop.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for public comments. Next would be the consent agenda. All matters listed under the consent agenda are considered routine by the village board and will be enacted by one motion. Is there a motion to approve the following items? 1, the accounts payable for the period of February 28th, 2020 through March 12th, 2020 in the amount of $80,767.97. The Village of Homer Glen's January legal bills from Mahoney, Silverman, and Cross LLC in the amount of $5,920.75. And Tria Architecture's invoice number 3209 for Heritage Park schematic design services in the amount of $16,586.11. Is there any discussion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Rogers?
Aye.
Trustee Suisse?
Aye.
Trustee Barium?
Aye.
Trustee Pazmino?
Aye.
Trustee Gray?
Aye.
And Trustee Holtz?
Aye.
Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the amended standard operating procedure number 001?
So moved.
Trustee Gray?
Second.
Trustee Barium?
I said I was waiting for a lot more than that. Usually there's so much more in those when you make those motions.
All right, but you made the motion.
Yes, I did.
You did the second? Okay. Discussion? Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Trustee Suisse?
Aye.
Trustee Burien?
Aye.
Trustee Pazmino?
Aye.
Trustee Gray?
Aye.
Trustee Holtz?
Aye.
And Trustee Rogers?
Aye.
Motion carries. Number 2, is there a motion to approve resolution number 20-003, a resolution authorizing the release of executive session minutes?
I so move.
Trustee Suisse,
A second.
Trustee Rogers. Discussion? Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Trustee Burien?
Aye.
Trustee Pazmino?
Aye.
Trustee Gray?
Aye.
Trustee Holtz?
Aye.
Trustee Rogers?
Aye.
Trustee Suisse?
Aye.
Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 20-004, an ordinance approving and adopting the official 2020 zoning map of the Village of Homer Glen? It is understood that this adoption includes map amendments approved over the course of 2019.
So moved.
Trustee Burien,
A second.
Trustee Rogers, discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Pazmino?
Aye.
Trustee Gray?
Aye.
Trustee Holtz?
Aye.
Trustee Rogers?
Aye.
Trustee Suisse?
Aye.
Trustee Burien?
Aye.
Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve ordinance 20-005, an ordinance establishing special service area number 20-001, Squared Goodings Grove in the Village of Homer Glen?
I so move.
Trustee Suisse?
Second.
Trustee Pazmino? All right. Is there any discussion?
Mayor, I'd just like to point out, this is for the people in the audience who don't know, this is the part of the public hearing that we had earlier where we asked for any input if there were any residents. This really will affect the future residents of the Square Goodings Grove, which is currently being built. They have a couple buildings up, and this is just putting in place kind of an insurance policy in case their homeowners association were to not perform the duties that they are bound to do by their agreement. So this is really just I know I've mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. I think it's just an insurance policy so that if they don't perform the duties that they're obligated to do, it won't fall to all the taxpayers of the village. It only falls to the SSA, the special service area, which will only encompass those homeowners. They'll pay into a fund to continue to take care of all of those. So I just want to, like I said, I think that bears repeating. So,
Okay. Is there any other discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Gray?
aye.
Trustee Holtz?
Aye.
Trustee Rogers?
Aye.
Trustee Suisse? Trustee Burien?
Aye.
Trustee Pazmino?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next would be a workshop item, proposed zoning code updates. Matt, this is all you.
Oh, yeah. We get the thing. So that'll be myself and Melissa presenting the workshop. So the village has been proposing zoning code text amendments on an annual basis. In 2019, we did the use tables, if you recall, and the liquor code changes. So over the past year, we collected numerous policy questions from the Plan Commission, from the trustees, and that need to be updated in the zoning code. Our initial list was about, I think 3 pages long, Carrie, if you remember. So we kind of picked the top 10 priority items, and that's the list you have in the memo. So we have slides explaining each one of these policy questions. So we're going to pause at the end of each item to get your input, starting with the first slide. You want to go to the first slide? Sure.
Wait, the wrong way. Sorry about that. So actually, this is the item that Mr. Cooper brought to you, which we've seen, you guys saw before with a request we had a variance come through this last year for a detached structure in R2, actually the same district that Mr. Cooper is in. As a the senior planner here at the village, I do get a lot of requests, specifically in this district, actually. And so we've put together some information for you guys to look at that breaks down each one of the districts and it did highlight before, but if you look across at R2, you can kind of see, and we talked about this in the staff item that went with the detached structure before, kind of how the jump happens where you have in our smaller density districts or higher density districts, R6 through R3A, how it's 650, and then you have the two 800s, and then the 800 in R2, and then it jumps all the way up to 1800 in the R1, where I feel like, and I think all staff kind of feels collectively that acre lot, the 43,000, is more character-wise similar to the 60,000 square foot lots that you find in R1 versus it being lumped in with those higher density lots, R2A and R3. And then for the purposes of this presentation, I also took this across the board so you can kind of see how those percentages come out based on that 800 square feet, and you can see how it's comparable to for like an acre lot where you get the 1.8% of the property, and how it's a little bit off kilter with that. And then we took our residential, the rural districts, E1, E2, and then our agricultural districts are all based on percentages of lots. And so I pulled those numbers across too, so you could see what that would look like if all the districts were at like a percentage. And then we looked at the comparison of potentially staff is looking at either maybe having a recommendation of a code update that would change this to the R2 district just going to the 1200, which is I think what we had all felt comfortable with when we granted the variance for that one property in particular. But after looking at this in detail and also just dealing with the different types of properties that we have in Homer Glen, I feel like even within each zoning district, you have a variable sizing of lots here. It's not as if every single district or every single subdivision has exactly the same size of lot. And so I don't know if it would be worth it for us to look at potentially doing a flat percent. I know Mr. Cooper mentioned something that's not on the slide, which is not having a restriction on the detached structure. So I think is what he alluded to, is just looking at the 20% lot coverage as a number. I do feel like most other communities that we have researched do have some kind of regulations for detached structures, and so I'm not sure if we would want to go in that route. But I'm not sure if a percentage would be out of the question, so that would just be up to you guys. So staff is looking for some direction on how we should handle the code update or handle a potential code update for this.
One thing that you'll notice on the bottom of the slide too is we talked about the difference between attached garages and detached. And right now our code doesn't really address those size limit for an attached garage versus a detached. So you can attach a garage as large as you want to, as long as you meet other bulk requirements, setbacks, lot coverage, things like that. So that's also something that we put on here too, that could be considered a loophole to our code that the board may want to consider to address that as well.
I do think that we didn't actually specifically bring this up for discussion tonight. There has been a lot of discussion in our office between the planning staff and the building staff about an interpretation that we have within the code about what that attachment is. Our code is a little bit gray on what that could be defined as. It doesn't really say that it has to be thermal envelope. It just says walls, roof, so it doesn't really indicate that you have to actually attach it. So I think staff has kind of come up with a way that we interpret it from a policy perspective and how we're moving forward, but I think that it's worth discussion for that too. I mean, whether or not we regulate the attached structures, how we attach that structures, how we define those, and then also how we would regulate detached structures and the allowance.
So any direction? Do you want to do incremental change for R2 or?
All of it.
I know when we spoke about this for the gentleman in Cedar Glen who came in, and I know he wanted a much higher variance. I think he was like 3,000 square feet, and
He wanted two.
okay, and we were right. I think right. We were kind of doing let's make a deal. We all kind of landed somewhere around 1,200. And I know that he was not particularly pleased at the end of that, and that really doesn't have any bearing on my thought tonight. But I do remember the discussion, and we all felt, relatively comfortable, especially given that Cedar Glen was kind of an outlier. It's a subdivision that oddly is split between incorporated and unincorporated, literally neighbor and neighbor are unincorporated and incorporated. So that made it a little bit weird because your neighbor could be, he could be working under a completely different set of rules, you know, and never have to come into this room and see us, but see a whole bunch of different people. So for my thought on it is, I do see the disparity. When you guys lay it out like this, and I wish we had this this table back then when we looked at the Cedar Glen thing.
Small one, but
because this really highlights the disparity. And again, I don't think anything was, you know, I don't think there was, if we could get back to a former board when some of these numbers were laid out, I doubt there was any intentional reason to, you know, put it to the people in an R2. It was probably just some oversight that people didn't necessarily see. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And it is something that should be addressed, because as we slide up that scale of getting into those larger pieces of property, there should be different qualifications, I think. So I'm certainly, I'm up for moving that number higher. Where that number is, we'll certainly all discuss. What concerns me more is if we go into some just multiplier number, we take away from R6, R3, things of that nature. So I want to make sure that we're not getting any more punitive than we already are on some of those other ones. So that's just one of my sensitivities. So
Agreed. I don't like the flat ones where it would take away from existing situations, and I'd be comfortable with changing the R2 to 1,200 square feet.
My take on it is we definitely have to regulate detached structures, but then on the bottom it says, is there to act about attached garage limits? I think that needs to be, and it says here that's a loophole in our code. I think that has to be addressed as well, because you can have with your house, I don't know, as long as it fits on the property, how large of an attached garage, and what about a detached structure? You know, I mean, can you have both possibly? You could.
Yeah,
I mean, you could have a huge.
you would bump up against lot coverage at some point, I would assume, like you said.
Well, yes, right. But I mean, it has to be, both has to be regulated or at least looked at.
I had a client in Homer off of 67th, and he's got a 4-car attached garage and a 6-vehicle detached. I don't know if you call it a garage, or, I mean, it stores vehicles. So I believe he's on 10 acres, but yeah.
But I think I would be okay with 1,200 for R2.
I agree, as long as it's comparable to the design of the home. I don't see why that wouldn't be a problem.
But also look at attached garage limits as well.
I'm fine with 1,200 as well, again, as long as it's matches the home or it's comparable to the home. But I don't have an appetite for assessing attached garage limits. I think that what I've seen is people who build homes and have 3-car garages are usually very nice homes, so I don't have a problem with. I don't think that that's something that I would be interested in looking at.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, if he wants to, as long as they have the setbacks and they obey all the other zoning codes and design guidelines, if they want it to be a monster 10-car garage built into their living room space.
It's on them.
I feel the same way. You could put a 10,000-foot garage under roof if you want. I think at a certain point, at a certain threshold of square footage, we implement height restrictions on the interior heights. So you're not getting something that's either going to be storing semis, or if you turn it into a banquet facility on the weekends or something when there's no, you know, when there's a lack of code enforcement. I mean, so maybe, you know, like I said, I do, you know, Mr. Cooper, you made, or Mr. Novak before, made a remark about his wife. I always tell my wife, we win the lottery, you can have the house you want, it'll only be rivaled by the garage I'm going to build. So you know, 10,000 under roof would not be a bad thing if it was attached to the house, but I do think then certain other restrictions would have to follow it, so.
Just for clarification, how it's attached, is that something that that you would support addressing? Because we have seen it, that could be very loosely defined in a code. Some people say, okay, you have a fence that connects the house to the garage, is that attached? Is it a breezeway? Is it a pergola? I mean, you'd be surprised at how far they can go to stretch the definition of attached. I think at a minimum, we should define how you expect that to be attached, and then also include some height restrictions as well.
Like in an adjoining wall or something?
One shared wall.
It's got to be
Shared
connected.
wall, right.
23.5 feet.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
Just a wall or a width over it as well?
Continuous roof.
I know. You would be surprised. We've seen some very creative solutions.
So even just recently, we had a wall with a roof, but the wall was only 18 inches high. And the roof was a bed-type roof that only one direction.
Oh, okay.
Can you guys gather some visuals and show us?
Yeah, show us
Some of the worst case, some of the best case?
what not to do.
I think a cleanup on that language is warranted. I think the 1,200 is fine. I agree with Trustee Gray. Looking at the chart in this way sort of opens, I think, our eyes to some of the disparities. When we had the gentleman come through, was it last fall? Time flies, but came through last fall, it wasn't, in the end, it wasn't let's make a deal. That number was based on the minimum that would have worked for his purposes because of length of truck, but it also was a number that I think we all were comfortable with. And the last thing I would say is there is still a variance process. I think the goal here is to cut down on the number of variances, but there is still a variance process. If we all agreed on 1,200 and there is a reason and there's a special situation, that process still exists. But I think this would go a long ways to cutting down on the number of variances on something that we seem to agree on.
I agree with Trustee Burien. I mean, at the end of the day, the mentality is we own our land, and, you know, the minimum restrictions, the better. And, you know, I know we need to follow rules, we need to follow certain things, but we got to see both aspects. So that's how I see it.
I agree. So it's a workshop, so there's no vote.
Oh, no, this is work. We're taking notes, so.
Getting started.
Taking notes. We're just getting started. Yeah. Should we move on to the next one?
Hey, same one up here.
Number 2. So this is going to deal with restricting the width of a driveway based on how many bays are proposed, is the question kind of proposed by staff. Again, as a planner reviewing permits all the time, I get a significant amount of questions about expanding driveways. Did a lot of research of other communities nearby, most of which do some kind of restricting to number of bays or just a maximum width. And there are a few communities that are similar to us where we really just only restrict at the apron, really at the property line. And so other than that, we have no restriction. The other thing that I think past planners have hung their hat on is that we do have a line in our code, I'm not sure exactly where it is, it says that you're not allowed to park in a front yard. And it's a general statement, it's a general zoning regulation that would apply to, say, office, commercial, residential, which would basically mean that every one of our commercial lots in the village is non-conforming with the parking lots out front. And so we are also suggesting that we would change that. There is a nuisance code language already in our code that says that you can't park on grass, which I think that was the intent of that, was that you wouldn't park in a front yard. Typically, that would even mean that you couldn't park on your own driveway. So I think in the past, planners have hung their hat on that and then required homeowners to create a driveway over to the side that would go to the side setback, and then they would be able to park in the side yard. And I'm not sure if staff really loves that either. So we're just looking for some direction on what, if anything, you would want to expand our regulations on that in any way. And then I prepared this slide. This is actually some snippets from a diagram that Naperville has that they do allow this kind of secondary driveway space. What they allow is actually the one all the way over to the right, they require you to have a space next to the house on the side setback. The one on the left is kind of like your more traditional, this is what I'm used to seeing in codes, is basically there's a restriction based on bays. And so if you had 3 bays, you might get 36 feet. If you had 2 bays, you might get 28 in 1 bay and so forth. And then there's usually an apron limit as well that's usually smaller than that. And then there's this kind of middle ground that would we prefer to have something that we would allow that expansion, but maybe not over into the side yard. And all of this would still abide by the driveway setback that we have that exists in the code currently. And then whether or not anybody has any opinions on tapering of angles and things like that, just because it does make things easier for permit review, but it also can be more regulating, so.
I don't think I'd like for my next door neighbor to park his car on my side yard. You know, that would really bother me. There's a house by me that's similar to the one in the middle, and it was built before we were a village. If my neighbor did that, I'd probably be upset too, because only where I live, I think I'd see a lot more flooding because you're creating a lot more of a hard surface. I'm not a fan of either of the last two at all. You know, adding more hard surfaces just increases flooding in the area, in my opinion. And again, I'd be really upset if my neighbor's car was parked on my side lot and I'm mowing my lawn next to his car. That would,
Or if they
not
started
lucky.
and let the car run for a couple hours to warm up, then you're breathing in all the toxins.
So based on the current code, if they wanted to do something other than what it stated, they would ask for a variance?
Technically, our code would allow anything to the right. We have a regulation that says that there's a minimum 28 feet at the property line, and there's a minimum 5 foot from the side property line.
So
other than that,
It says that allowed based on the current.
it's free game.
So as long as that strip of green is 5 feet.
Exactly.
From the lot line, then that would be allowed.
Right.
That's pretty small.
So, I must say, I walk a lot in the neighborhoods, and I know it's part of our code that you can now park a boat, a camper, things of that nature out front as long as it's on a hard surface. And to me, the one on the far right, while I get your comment, Beth, about, if it was your neighbor, I think from just a front visual, I'd much rather see the camper back there, or something stored, if it's going to be stored, and that is allowed, But I'd also say, if we were going to entertain bringing things over to the side more of that impervious surface, I know we're going to be talking, and it's not tonight, but at some future point about, allowing permeable pavers and things of that nature. So maybe we can kind of start to mix and blend some of these things together, so.
I think you'll see a lot more outside boat storage, and that's not something that I would want to live next door to.
But we already are. Now you're seeing it in the front yard, because it is.
Right, but I think if you did this, you're people who are now storing their boats somewhere, it's like, all right, now I got a place to put my boat. I mean, if they
could put it on the driveway though, right now. They could put it in front of the garage and block off one of the bays of
I just think you're curbing a lot of eyesores by just sticking with the first one. I think you're going to run into a lot of neighbor disputes if we continue to allow the other two.
But sticking with the first one would be creating a prohibition against the second two. Because right now,
we need
all
to
of them
change the code.
Right.
Why in that third picture on the right does it show like light gray aproning around the driveway?
I don't know. It was just in the Naperville diagram. Sorry, I didn't have time to Photoshop it out.
Joe, do we get a lot of complaints about the whole, I know it's been some years since they made the change to the code about boats and RVs. Do you still get a lot of calls?
Not generally, no.
And so the current code allows the far right image?
Correct. And then you'd be allowed to park, what, one RV, one trailer, one, yeah.
The language in the trailer boat RV ordinance was an approved hard surface. So if it was allowed for the planning department, they would be able to put a boat on there as long as it was approved hard surface.
So I guess my question is, what's prompting considering changing this?
Well, who just got done saying you can park a boat there, you can park a trailer there, you can park, you got a used car lot.
That's our current code, is what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm more concerned about future developments, new subdivisions coming in, which hopefully we'll see that. And if all of a sudden we have new homes coming in and we're going to see more of it. I'm not necessarily saying that what's there is there now. I'm looking for future. I'd like to clean it up for the future.
I'm guessing if you have a lot this size, it's going to be a nice boat, a nice trailer.
It doesn't have any lot sizes here. Still doesn't matter that.
So, and I guess I could have done another one of these, which would have been the worst case scenario, which I guess technically if they had a smaller house and enough lot coverage, they could just pave their front yard, technically by our code, so long as they met setbacks. And it was connected to the egress to the driveway, yeah.
This whole front yard is paved.
In the language then,
We could.
we don't necessarily want to be so restrictive to,
I agree.
can we find a balance?
There is a restriction against paving the entire front yard. They're going to bump up against impervious surface coverage
Right.
at some point.
Yeah, I just, yeah.
Out of the peer communities that are listed here, do any of the others allow that side past the garage?
The one that's this last one?
right.
This last one is what's required by Naperville. So like this is from their diagram, and you're not allowed to do the middle one there. You have to, if you want an extra parking space, you have to provide it on the side, yeah.
Was there a question?
There was, with the driveway proposals, doesn't it fall into your 20% coverage?
Yes, but the 20% would only be in your district. There's a varying number of percentages depending on the district. And then, like we have there's properties in R3, just so you guys understand, like in R3, I just located 3 properties the last couple of weeks that were 2.5 acres. And that's significant. I mean, the fact that those regulations are based on an 18,000 square foot lot and they allow 45% lot coverage on a 2.5 acre property, and there's no indication that restricts buildable lot or taking out conservation easement or anything like that, it gives that property owner a significant amount of area to cover. And so I think those are the types of things that we have to think about. We don't have we have a few traditional neighborhoods, but we have a lot of neighborhoods that were developed in a very different way, where we have conservation property that's within lots, which is not typical of this type of zoning. So.
And you mentioned as earlier, any towns, Lennox doesn't let you do that.
Off to the side.
Off the side. My son lives there, we did it at his house. And they actually encouraged it instead of making it better.
So if I could ask a question. So we already have this in our code that you can put a driveway on the side of your house. So if people already have that, they already have an RV or a boat or a trailer or whatever it may be, and we change this to just one or the other.
Then you couldn't.
And now all of a sudden, now they can't park on the side.
No, they'd be grandfathered.
Yeah, I was going to say.
If they have it, yeah.
It would be for new
Couldn't build it or
construction
expand
only.
on it.
Just moving forward, there was nothing that was permanent.
Right.
We're not going to take yours away.
Don't take mine away.
I don't know, I think if we're going to,
I'm grandfathered.
It's going to be out there graveling
I think if we were going to stay with this, I would like to see the side, if it's only like, 5 feet, make that a lot. You got to stay away from your neighbors, make that a bigger setback on the side. Then if we're going to stay with this type of driveways, I think 5 feet is way too close to be parking your car or vehicle.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. For new construction.
Right, yeah, you're not going to tell, but, okay, so what if,
Okay with the minimum 15-foot setback, side yard setback?
It's 5 for a driveway.
On the side here, you have minimum 15.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's it's 5. Our driveway setback is 5.
Yeah, so what I'm asking, would you guys be comfortable with 15, or what number would you be comfortable with?
Yeah, I'd be comfortable with 15.
15 would make more sense.
I'll go with that.
You'd be comfortable with the typo?
Naperville does it. This is good for Naperville. We can do it too.
What about the tapered angle or curved? Is that something we need to discuss as well, Melissa, while we're on this slide?
So I do get requests to just do like a square. That's like the typical thing, is that people just want to pave a parking space, not for an RV, but they want to be able to like turn their car in and just park it perpendicular. So if you can imagine, there would be none of this, and then I sit there and try to help them make it look a little bit nicer. So, but that becomes difficult, to do that. So I don't know if there's that's really my biggest concern, is the square, where you have just like a setback off the property line is 5 feet, and setback off the property line to the east is 5 feet, and a big rectangle.
So when you were saying when people have like a parking spot that's facing, your driveway is this way, and then you have one facing this way, when I lived on Wilcook Road, I had one of those because it's on a busy road, so it makes it easier and safer for a vehicle to back into that space and then pull up,
back out and get out
instead of backing out.
Right.
So for purposes of that reason, I can totally understand.
I do think there are some zoning codes that address those types of things. If you're on a specific kind of road, a collector or higher, you might be able to be allowed to do certain things that you're not allowed on other streets.
And then we're talking, sorry, I'm taking over the meeting here. We're talking about restrictions of driveway width. Now, perfect example, where I live, you have your driveway, but then we have bricks that go along the side of the driveway. Is that going to be restricted as well, since we're talking about widths?
So when we would review that, if I would review that, those bricks would be part of your driveway.
Right. Another grandfather in situation.
Well, currently,
Or we know people install patios with their bricks. She's not supposed to be talking about
That's part of your driveway. I mean, because now you could be, you're not staying 15 feet away, like say if you're staying 15 feet away, it's going to have to be including your stones that you put out there, right?
Well, I guess we could ask for direction on that topic.
Right.
Consider decorative stone and wood, consider part of your driveway.
yeah, I think typically I said just no bait, like if there's our code kind of loosely defines landscaping as stones as not having a base, as be loose, like more like a mulch look, I guess. I don't know.
I guess my thing is I really don't like the idea of like dictating what people are doing on their private property, and so the less
I agree.
we can do, the better. I'm fine with a 15-foot setback, but I don't really feel like it's our place to tell them what their driveway has to look like.
Well,
But you could now put stone and, you could put bricks there and make your driveway 10 feet wider if you're not going to address it.
So is it fair that since this is kind of mixing two areas of the planning as well as landscape, I know the environmental committee is starting to look at landscape codes and starting to set that up. I know, Melissa, you kind of threw air quotes around, we loosely have a landscape, and I agree wholeheartedly with that. We don't really dial in a lot of that stuff, so maybe the Environment Committee can take a look at that, help us, dial in what's landscaping, what's hard, is it considered hardscaping, or paving, whatever you call it, for the driveway.
Well, the problem, if you don't have a hard purpose or a hard surface, and they do park a boat back there, they park a motor home, if they park anything big and it's stone, it's going to sink. So,
Yeah, are we talking about stone, like loose stone, or Joe, are you thinking pavers?
Well, more pavers, yeah, I mean, they use it as a decal, get landscape look more.
right, but even the pavers,
Stone there.
So maybe we, after a certain amount, or a certain width, it goes from a path or something.
right, and then it just teeters because you don't have anything solid to hold it in place.
That's where I would say let staff investigate this, because I think we're all saying we don't want a loophole if we're saying that there's a set width, and then someone can go afterwards and add some sort of pavers and things that you could park a car on. But if it's landscaping, I think it's how that language is presented, right, and the intent. But I do agree with Trustee Suisse that I don't think we want to leave a loophole that you get approved for a certain width driveway and then you can go and add another 10 foot on because you're calling it landscaping. It's usable parking space. I would think if we're going through it, let's clean that up. But, and I don't know how to, I think that's where that's up to
You're on.
our staff to determine what would be considered, how we would be able to put the language to distinguish between landscaping type and, I don't know if that's width, I don't know what that is, right? I don't know, but
Right.
I think that would be the challenge.
Well, I think as long as our vehicle, that it says specifically RVs, boats, and vehicles must be on a hard surface, then we're okay.
I just asked that we be very careful, because at the end of the day, it's the landowner's land, let's keep it on both sides.
It is, but
Yeah, but you gotta be careful.
Up against the edge of it,
Yeah.
and you impact flooding or things like that.
We get that.
Yeah, then you got mosquitoes there. I mean, that's the only reason they want the hard surface, so it can't screw up any of the drainage. So, I mean, if they wanted to pay to have drainage put on the side because they were close to it, they can go ahead and do it. But as soon as, when we went over this, and this is years ago, the people would pull in and you could actually see the tires sunk into the ground. I mean, some of them are 8 inches down in the ground. So you need a hard surface. And it's got to be built up to where, when they get to the end of it, it doesn't crack off. And if they put the pavers, they'd be better off putting in a bigger bricks than they are pavers, because they don't teeter as much.
Well, I'd like to see a little more research, which we agreed to, so.
We can do some additional research and come up with some wording for the board to consider in the future. So just to clarify, so for example number 1, where there is no additional, the driveway lines with the front of the garage, that would be still the 5-foot side yard setback. And for the 2 other examples, those would be a minimum 15-foot setback from the adjacent property. Is that what I'm seeing?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
All right.
We'll go next one. Yeah. So the next one is outdoor dining. So about 2 years ago, we kind of called out this item when we discussed the use tables with the CED committee to try to relax some of the special use requirements for outdoor dining. So there was an incremental change made at that time, and the recommendation was to have the village board approve up to 15% of the total indoor seating without going through a special use permit process. So if you go to the next slide, what that means is if a restaurant has 26 tables, they can have up to 4 tables approved by the village board without a special use permit. So we kind of looked at other communities, how they do the approval. Lamont requires special use permit only for 10, when they have 10 seats or more. Lockport requires a special use permit, and they go by tables. When they have more than 10 tables, they're more flexible. Orland Park allows staff review for all outdoor dining seating without any special use permits. So we're looking for some direction how to make it relax a little bit more for businesses. So I guess one option could be to allow staff to do administrative review for a seating capacity of 9 or less. However, if they're encroaching into a drive aisle or parking, they would still need to apply for a special use permit, similar to what Tavern in the Glen did. So if they're encroaching, they need to go through the process anyway. But if they're doing under 9 seats or, would like to know your direction if staff review, you can do through the staff review.
My thought on this is it depends where it's at, because I just don't want to see it automatic, even if it's for seating of 9 or less, if it's depending on the zoning. What if it's right next to a residential? And I mean, then they don't have any idea, there's no notice or anything. Would a notice still be given to, say, the adjacent property owners for outdoor seating? So it depends on the zoning and how close your residential would be to that. Just to, not to automatically just give them, 9, 10 seats if it's close to houses.
Well, I don't see any restaurant areas, 159, 143rd Bell Road, anything close to residential, except maybe Founder's Crossing, which is across the street from, what subdivision is that, Kingsbury?
Well, you don't know what the future, we're talking not about what's here now, but we're talking about what possibly can happen in the future.
But I don't see any any businesses near any residential.
So the exception, I'm sorry, the exception could be the graphic on the top is proposed mug shots, which is actually abutting a residential lot, but it's the eastern end of the Orlando Shopping Center. That's the end cap unit. So that's the kind of situation where they could, you could abut a residential zone lot, but then you still have a drive. If they impact the driveway, and these folks are actually coming through a plan commission and village board anyway because they're impacting the existing ramp. So that triggers a special use permit review. But if they're contained within the sidewalk area under 9 seats, I mean, that would be an example to compare with.
I'm fine with the proposed change.
My only concern is what you just said is you guys are going to be now making sure that all of this is ADA compliant. So when I pull up, I'm assuming that. And then I have a little bit of concern about quality too, because, you know, I've seen an outdoor seating area in the village that looks really bad. Most of them look really good, but some of them look really bad, you know, plastic chairs out there. So I get concerned about that, but I'm fine with the proposed change, but it's something to keep in mind, you know. Maybe we need to talk about what kind of furniture is going to go out there. Are we going to allow furniture that's going to take flight into the parking lot when there's a heavy wind? And the other thing that bothers me is the trash. It's hard to stay on top of these people to clean up the trash on these outside areas, and the cigarette butts. You know, they get a lot. I know that's not part of what this is, but that is something that we need to look at as well, is making sure we have rules in place where, you know, our code enforcement can pull up, and if there's cigarette butts all over, write some warnings and talk to the people about it and make sure it gets addressed, because some areas are really bad. Again, as long as it's ADA compliant, and I would like to look at what types, you know, just making sure that, again, we have some quality furniture out there, nothing that, you know, something that's stable, again, that's not going to take off if we get a microburst and go flying into the parking lot and take people's cars out. And also that they're not by homes. And I know we don't have some now, but I start to think about mixed-use developments that could potentially be coming, where we have some commercial mixed with some residential, however that may lay out. I'm not saying I would be against it, but I think it's something that we would just have to look at. If I'm moving into a mixed-use place, I got to assume, you know, if I'm moving up above a store, I better assume that that store could be a restaurant or a bar or something like that. And I'm assuming, well, they're probably going to want outside seating. So in some ways, you're like, well, you know, buyer beware. But I do think that when it's close to a residential, it should be something that comes to the village, so that we're not just opening ourselves up to some potential disputes.
Again, I think that we should be very careful. I agree with, you know, a lot that Trustee Rogers said, but we have to be very careful with the restrictions, because we don't want to ward off any future businesses from coming in. And we have to remember that a broad base of our revenue is businesses. So we don't want to scare them off.
Yeah, you know. But I totally agree. But then we also want to have some standards.
I agree.
I work in an area where, you know, this is what I see: the picnic tables and the broken umbrellas and the things like that. And that's not something I want to see in Homer Glen. I totally agree. I go to restaurants. I pick them when they have outdoor seating. So I love it when they do outdoor seating. But I just think we need to make sure that there's some rules and guidelines put in place.
Yeah, you made some valid points. I agree with you on the furniture. I hadn't thought about that. I do want to point out in terms of code enforcement and garbage and getting on the businesses, now that the businesses are under a license and the threat of losing that license if they aren't, in conformance with the regulations, that has more teeth.
To give us better flexibility as far as entering businesses at any time.
As I think about those future projects, I think there's one that's being built right now that has this potential, and is Gooding Square, where you have that commercial lots that are going to be right up against those residential. And so I think those are valid points to take those into consideration. At the same time, I do think I'm comfortable with the change for the reason that at times, I think there's always reasons not to do things for the fear of the worst. I would simply say, although we don't want to roll things back, you always have the right. If we get in a situation where on a capacity of 9 or less, and staff make a decision that adversely affects residents like that, and the board at the time says, what the hell were you doing? We have the right to roll that back. But don't use it as a reason to not make it more flexible as we go forward. So I'm comfortable with the change, but I think those are important points on the proximity to residential, and we do have those situations.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I'd like to, I agree with Beth's comment about quality. It should be, something that's well-built and not temporary looking, can stand up to a storm. But a few other things, and I'm very comfortable with giving much more of this over to an administrative review, but I do want to say, before I just go out there and say that I'm uncomfortable with that, I'm comfortable with taking a second look at this, because when I read this, and I read this 4 or 5 times, because it took me so long to get through it, because you're mixing tables and seats all over the place, and you're not really giving me a definitive, if I have 52 seats inside my restaurant, what am I allowed outside? You guys mix that back and forth on table, so I need a second look at this with clear, all the way through. A table's a table's a table, an occupant's an occupant. So that's one thing. The other thing is bollards. I know when Tavern in the Glen came in, there were a lot of concerns. There really weren't that many concerns to begin with about putting bollards up there. Once you got out there and looked at it and realized that there was traffic coming in from the south out of the bank that could have driven right through there, and also the fact that you were taking, I know you still have it in here as part of the provisions that if you go into the drive aisle, but I mean, we really need to start looking a little bit more outside of just that envelope of where they're proposing that and what could potentially happen. It's much easier right now to say, put a bollard here, put a bollard there. So I'd like to see that, there's at least a review portion in the planning department once these things come forward that bollards are checked off. Somebody's looked at that, assessed it, and made a qualified decision about it. So if that's what you call it.
All right, so the next one is whether or not we have any interest in requiring cross-access for new developments. Our current zoning regulations do not require that these connections be made. This is something that, typically if it was a site plan that came through, was not part of a plan development and just met code, it would be very difficult for staff to use leverage unless they were asking for a variance or some other kind of thing to get a cross connection. Vehicles, typically, so these are just a few things that kind of highlight why planners ask for these types of things. It reduces congestion along streets, it assists with pedestrian movement throughout. It does have some connections with economic development. There are things that show that people will stay shopping in an area if they can fluidly move through those shopping centers. In the beginning, these things are just restatements from the original slide. Currently, we don't require it. I feel like the communities that we looked at are kind of all over the place. Like some places kind of allude to it more than anything. So it's just kind of a general mention of vehicular areas must be accessed, or streets shall be carried to the boundaries. Well, Glenview's was really particular. Let's see, Naperville's. Requires streets and other cross connections to afford convenient access to all property. New Lenox has a strong stance on it, but nothing specific in their code. And Orland Parks has an actual statement in the code that says that it's required. But then again, even in Orland, it says what staff would recommend, so it kind of leaves it open-ended again.
So my initial breakdown, and this is all I'm going to say about this, I liked almost everything in all of the peer communities. Except for New Lenox, because they didn't really put a stake in the ground. They support it, but they don't really support it. So I liked most of that language for all the other 4 or 5 different peer communities. And the only other thing I wrote down was, and it was an arrow up to, that it's difficult to force them to do it. And I wrote down that, what we find difficult to enforce, we can always incentivize. So maybe we need to, look at that too, because I think this is a great idea. And really this helps, I know Carrie and I have spoken a lot about master planning along 159th Street. We sit here and we have sat here for years saying, well, we can't wait till 159th is done, and we want it to look like a certain way. But really, if we're not master planning that, it's going to happen however it wants. So this is our way of saying a little bit, at least, that we envision something. And that's why I say, we can incentivize some of those things where maybe we do have to throw a little skin in that game to get that access way. So that's my comments.
Yep.
And we do recognize that some of these will take a while to get, because you can't force the adjacent property owner to provide that connection if they're not doing anything with their property. But over a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, you'll get it. And eventually you'll have a network that really is quite useful for the entire community.
I agree that the cross-access, it just facilitates more shopping. It makes it more accessible. I've seen it 1,000 times where I am on 159. Sometimes you got to pull out and you're like, maybe I won't go next door. I'll just go there later. But if you can cross over immediately and not go into the main street, that's good for everybody.
We see a lack of that up at Jewel, and I know I said I wouldn't talk anymore, sorry. We see a lack of that, though, at Jewel and Menards, where, there was supposed to be, there was envisioned a connection there, and we've seen that in our budget cycles for years, putting money aside for that, but that doesn't seem to happen because we are having a hard time forcing that.
And I can tell you that there are pieces in this town that have not gotten developed because the neighbors that are contiguous will not give cross-access agreements. So without charging an unreasonable amount of money to the property owner or the potential property owner, so those lots are just sitting there empty because of that specific reason. So I like Orland's language. I think that, we have staff on here that would be able to dictate and say this has to have a cross easement, or this has to have a frontage road or something.
Yeah, especially with the way 159th Street is with a curb. It's very hard for some people to try to turn in. Sometimes they have to go half a block or a block away to turn around, and it hurts the businesses, and that's not what we want to do. And we've got it right now to where we can kind of dictate what we want.
Am I good?
Right. Yeah.
All right, the next one is whether or not we want to allow 6-foot privacy fences in corner side yards. So the village has a history of granting variances for different things. So we've granted variances for just 6-foot fences that are open in the corner side yard. We've granted them for 6-foot fences that are privacy with, sometimes there's some conditions within those. Sometimes it's just that there was an existing fence there that they've had for 25 years and they're just replacing it. And then I believe that VJ, through the years that he's been here, and even since I've been here, we've heard that there's been some appetite for flexibility within that corner side yard if we had the right regulations. So our current code is a 4-foot max, 50% open, not in the clear vision on the corner of the 2 intersections. Also not allowed in the front yard beyond the building line. And just as a side note, that chain link is currently allowed in our front and our corner side yards. And I just threw that in there because I was just curious, like how, since we were going to talk about fences and front yards and corner side yards, how the board felt about that. So our community peer analysis that we did, Frankfurt requires the front corner side yard fences be decorative. And when I spoke with them, there's this 4-foot max and open. It was the new Linux one that they've recently changed their code, I believe, to do 4 feet. They actually, previous to that, had a very complex diagram that allowed 2, 3, 4-foot combinations all in their front and side and corner yards. Glenview allows 4-foot open in the front and corner sides. No chain link is allowed. Lockport allows 4-foot open in front and side yards, but they have a restriction in the length that you can have. And Orland allows 6-foot privacy fences. Naperville is similar to ours as well. They do allow 6-foot privacy fences in the corner side yard when the yard aligns with a rear yard or a corner side yard, and I'll show you a slide after this that kind of explains that situation. So then for your consideration, whether or not we would allow chain link in front and corner side yards to continue, and then increasing the allowance to 6-foot privacy only for, this is statute recommendation, back-to-back corner lots. And then this is kind of an explanation of what the situations that you could have that might be bad if we just blanketly gave the approval, right? So if you have what's called a reverse corner side yard, which is the one in the middle, this is like kind of your worst case scenario if you were to allow a privacy fence on a corner lot that potentially could block someone's driveway. That is a front lot that would be adjacent to them. So that's where our rear yard is adjacent to a side lot line. So that staff would recommend that we would only allow this condition to happen in the one that's over to the right, which is where you would have back-to-back corner lots. Does somebody here have a chain link fence in their front yard?
Next time you're checking that out.
I do.
The middle situation is my house. That is me. I'm the house in the front and, you know.
Christine, your time's up.
I'm sorry. I didn't put it in. It was there when I moved in. Well, I'm getting situations that might happen.
Is yours an open fence or is it it's open fence? Yeah. So is it 6 foot?
You gotta quit asking her questions. She's done.
It's like it's not about you. I know.
That's what I told her, the world doesn't revolve around.
Why a situation like that would happen.
Yeah. We have a lot of 6-foot fences in the village, I think, that have been there for a really long time.
Get an attorney.
Okay, question, just for example, Christine, wouldn't you be the first one though? So say this is 163rd, and then.
So the middle square, my house is the one to the right. So my house is the one.
Yeah, I know, but we would still never allow them to block a clear vision from a
My
driveway.
neighbor's house is the same direction. So their driveway is in my backyard.
Okay.
Those are different.
Having trouble picturing it.
So Melissa, I had one question.
Those would be through a variance process.
As I read through this, turning my mic on. As I read through this, I kept getting hung up on the not to exceed 50% open in a lot of the language that's in our current code. Trying to find like one specific example. It says it in several places, not to exceed 50% open. So when I kept reading that, I was like, well, if you don't exceed 50% open, isn't that encouraging privacy? You're encouraging closed. You're saying you can have it open up to 50%, but no more, not to exceed 50% open. So anything under 50, privacy, would be allowed. So this is written, I think, and again, I know this is legacy copy in here, but I'm reading that and I kept stumbling over it and I'm like, I think this is written backwards. If you look in our actual code, and here, let me get really technical for staff, 220, what is it, 220.812D10 says not to exceed 50% opacity.
I think this.
It is kind of written back.
Yeah, and again, I'm okay with 6 foot in the side yard. I'd prefer to see it off the sidewalk a little bit. You know, 2 feet would be great because when you're walking along, when they tend to be a little close. So I like a little comfort zone there. I'm okay with 6 foot on a corner lot and on side lots.
Yeah, I think we've always given it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've all kind of said that in rotation around here over the years that, you know what, we see this all the time. So I really don't have any issues with that, but I think you need to look at that language and just kind of like read it a couple times over and go, I think we've kind of had the wrong end of this for years.
It's funny because we always just say 50% open. We don't actually say that part of it, which is the not to exceed.
I never liked the yard fence art ordinance. I do have a corner lot. I did not have to get a variance for the permit because I built my fence on my building line.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that we could consider?
So that would not be in the corner side yard. If it's in line with your building line, then it would technically be within your rear yard.
Yeah, because it starts at the back of the house.
Yep.
Okay. Second thing, what I don't see addressed here, and I like the back-to-back corner lots, and I like privacy, do what you want, go for it. On Maverick and Parker, we have a house, their rear yard is a 6-foot fence, their side yard is a 4-foot open picket fence. It looks ridiculous. You still can't see the traffic on Parker. You literally have to pull out past the stop sign to see traffic moving south. And then across the street, that driveway faces this side yard, and they've got huge evergreens lining the entire front property line all the way to the sidewalk, so you literally can't see left either. And, you literally have to pull out into the intersection in order to see traffic either way. And that's not the only location like that. I see that pretty often. I would like to see stuff like that addressed, because he should be able to have the side privacy on the northeast part of the corner. You know what I'm saying? He should be okay to do it based on sight lines.
Right.
This 4-foot fence on this 4-foot fence on the side doesn't accomplish anything, and the 6-foot is actually the one that's obstructing the sight line. Does that make sense? I don't see that being addressed. I'd like to see that be addressed, but I'm good with the back corner.
And I would like to address the landscaping with the big giant trees that create fences also.
Yes.
Because I feel like that's a loophole in a lot of codes.
Yeah. I've got
I've seen over
pictures
the years.
of, I forget what street it is. It's like over near 139th, 140th and Oak over there. And literally there's an evergreen that's just enveloping the stop sign and the street sign. You can't even see it. And that's another situation where you have to pull out into the intersection. The girl that works for me was in a car accident and her car was totaled there because you can't see traffic coming.
You want to let me know that we do have in the right of way on that? Things we can do.
Yeah, I think I still have the pictures. So, but yeah, I'm good with that.
What about the type of fence? Are you okay with chain link?
No.
In the front and the corner side yard.
No? No?
No,
Ruben?
No, but I was questioning, what about if someone had a dog run?
Yeah, I would say I'm not in the front, but around the back.
In the rear,
Right.
you do it.
I don't know. Just asking.
Melissa, I'm sending you these pics.
Okay.
Change of topic, food trucks. So more and more communities are encouraging food trucks to attract, gatherings, get more interaction with people. In Homer Glen, food trucks are allowed at special events, as well as by Will County Forest Preserve, which you have seen last summer. And food trucks also, they pair well with craft products or wine facilities, which we added to the use tables about a year ago. However, food trucks can be viewed as unfair competition by the brick and mortar restaurants, so that's the downside. Currently, our code does not have any regulations for food trucks on an ongoing basis. So we looked at the peer communities, starting with the location. New Lenox and Plainfield allow food trucks on an ongoing basis with certain restrictions in commercial and industrial districts. Plainfield excludes residential and agricultural districts. Mokena requires property owner's consent, otherwise the food truck needs to maintain at least 200-foot distance from restaurants, and that's on private properties. On public properties, options include allowing food trucks in the public rights-of-way, on-street parking spaces, designated special zones, or to congregate at certain times. Heritage Park would be a good example. Looking at the operational aspects of food trucks, go to next slide. So you could have standards for the hours of operation, access to restrooms, waste and recycling, and the placement of tables and chairs. Communities generally allow food trucks between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m., and this includes New Lenox, Mokena, or prescribe a maximum number of hours at a given location like Plainfield does, no more than 48 hours at any given time. The next item you need to look at is health and safety. Most communities ask for the county health department approval for all food trucks. And it's, if you want to be more restrictive, we can ask for, like the brick and mortar restaurants, they need to display the health inspection grades on their trucks. That's one option. The next item is the local tax revenues. I know this came up at the CED committee meeting. That was a concern. In Illinois, pre-prepared food may be subject to restaurant food tax rate. So what we could do is, if you want to make sure they're paying the sales tax, we can ask for the IBT number when they ask for the business license. However, it's not going to have any dramatic impact on sales tax revenue because they're limited capacity of selling. We primarily want food trucks to get more people, more gatherings. So most of the communities, they don't monitor collection of sales tax revenues, but we could if the board wishes to. So going back to the location on private, public properties, do you have any direction here to allow food trucks like an ongoing basis?
Well,
Yeah, back to the previous, sorry, yeah. So the location would be, do you want to allow in commercial and industrial districts? If so, do you want to have that 200-foot distance requirement to brick and mortar restaurants?
I just had a concern about the Plainfield language.
Yeah.
Because you do have people that hire food trucks for private parties in their neighborhoods.
Sure.
I mean, as long as they're not blocking traffic or anything, I don't see a problem with it.
They exclude residential.
I know I don't
Yeah.
want to exclude it.
I think that they have restrictions on it in commercial and industrial, but they specifically say they're not going to have restrictions on it
I
in
don't have a
residential.
problem with letting somebody hire a food truck for a birthday party.
I think that's what that says.
Right, I'm saying
Oh,
I don't want
okay.
that.
I'm sorry. I thought you were saying you didn't want that.
So you don't want people that have food trucks for birthday parties?
No, I do. This says it excludes it. Plainfield specifically excludes residential.
restrictions.
Yeah.
For other restrictions.
Oh,
They have restrictions on commercial and industrial districts.
is that what that
They-
means?
They don't have them in
I
residential.
thought
So they're not
it was saying
regulated.
They're not.
They do allow
Sorry.
it. They do allow it. for
Okay, I
Yeah.
misunderstood. Gotcha.
Yeah. I have a comment. My take on it is, for special events, or like what Trustee Holt says, like if you're having a party and I've seen, the trucks out there, I think that's fine, but to allow them into the village, I think it just cuts down on it cuts into our own businesses and our own restaurants. So unless it's for a special event like we have out here, or like when we had Homer Harvest Days, we had food trucks, or for special parties, I'm okay with that, but just to allow it open for any of them to come in, I think we're just hurting our own businesses.
I agree.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I like New Lennox's language, actually, because, we could, I think that we would have to, in commercial and industrial, by permit only, because exactly what Sharon's saying, if, let's say you're next to a State Farm agent, or we'll take just like Ruben's place, for example, and the State Farm agent decides that she wants to have an event and has a food truck and parks it in front of his restaurant at lunchtime. I have a problem with that. So I think we should have some kind of controls over the commercial and the industrial. But I do know that it is the popular thing now is to have the hot dog stand for your kids' birthday parties, at the birthday parties. So I like New Lennox's language exactly. And in the agricultural districts, we're already doing that. I think they are already at yours and at Bangston's or, I didn't answer.
I think given that we have a permitting process also for a guy to walk your neighborhood and sell you windows, that we need a lot more
Yeah.
review in here of who's taking a look at these.
Right.
I'm okay, like you said, I wouldn't want one. I think it would, you're both absolutely right. And, and Ruben, you didn't make the point, but you would suffer from it, if if, like Beth said, your neighbor was having that, it'd be like, hey, well, I'm paying rent and insurance, all this guy rolls up and I don't mean to single you out, but, I mean, that is fair. You have a vested interest in this village, so we do need to protect some of those commercial establishments a little bit better, the agricultural, the special events, the residential. But I really think we need to start in this building and make sure that we're looking at those people and saying, who are you? You're coming into our village and, you're like I said, we have a lot more, we have probably a page and a half of restrictions on the guy who wants to sell you windows.
Right, because we don't allow ice cream trucks, right? So is this going to open this up?
You need to tell the guy in my neighborhood.
Yeah, they still come through. They still.
I mean, they're not allowed, but
No,
I mean,
they're not
if they're
allowed, but
around,
the parents
you
are-
want to know who's driving the ice cream truck and serving, kids and things like that. We don't allow them now.
We blanket a lot of food trucks. Is that going to
Right.
bring in an ice cream truck? I mean, is that?
No, that's,
Melissa's looking at me probably like, I've never encountered a village.
What's the reason for not, I mean, I don't know any better. What's the reason for not allowing an ice cream truck?
I don't know.
The purpose of that was because we had no regulations on ice cream trucks. They were
Okay.
coming into town,
Yeah.
selling who knows what kind of product.
Right.
I grew up on the south side. I miss the ice cream trucks, so I mean, well, my biggest, I don't want to say fear, but concern, I don't mind, as a restaurant owner in Homer Glen, I don't mind the competition at all. On the contrary, I think it's going to force us to step up our game a little bit. But I do like the concept of leveling the playing field. So, for example, health issues, that's my biggest concern. Will County, when they come in, they are very strict. So are these food trucks going to go through the same scrutiny that we do as a restaurant? Are they going to have the same skin in the game? So, I mean, Will County comes around maybe once a year, and that's just for our brick and mortar places. Imagine a food truck.
But anything moving though, like for the festivals, you see how many times they.
Oh, yeah, they're very strict,
pop in again.
absolutely. But once we broaden it, who's to say that they're going to have the same, be as strict, especially, current situations going on. I'm a fan of having, I don't mind having them in subdivisions for private events, but I think maybe a certain commercial area where they're not surrounded by other restaurants, that would be an idea. Certain area.
Well, that's why New Lenox's works, because it says restrictions, so they would have to come in here. So like if Home Depot wanted to put hot dog stands out there or a truck out there, you're like, okay. But they have to come and ask. It's not an open policy.
Gotcha.
as opposed to, and sometimes those carts take up a lot of parking spots, so then they're not in compliance anymore. If they're in, like there are some smaller shopping centers, if a big cart came in, we saw some of them out here for Homer, there was
Right.
some of them were really big, and some of them had some stinky fumes, so we need to take that stuff into consideration too. So I think having some controls over it, where they do have to come in and pull a permit. When they pull a permit, they're going to have to show their health inspection thing and that type of stuff.
Well, I think that we should know every one of them that comes in here anyhow, just in case.
So they should
God
register
forbid-
as a vendor?
Well, when they do the block
think
parties
that's
and
fair.
stuff, they do have to come in and get permission.
Right.
Okay.
Because if something, God forbid, happened, because it doesn't mean the health department's going to be there every day that someone's out there. And sometimes they move from spot to spot to spot. But God forbid someone got sick, you got to have something so at least people know, who it was and when it was.
So hypothetically speaking, if we move forward and say we want to see the specific language that New Lenox and Plainfield have and consider adopting that language, those restrictions will be listed for us to look over?
sure, yeah.
Okay.
And we could include the property owner's consent to begin with, and also have, if you want, we can have certain distance from brick and mortar restaurants. You can add more restrictions. So,
Yeah, we don't want them competing with our restaurants. That's definitely not fair to them at all.
Any concern about potential?
I think it's more what Ruben said, it's more just make sure the playing fields are fair. They're not getting away with a lot more than some of the other ones.
I've never owned an ice cream truck, and I've never owned a food truck, but I believe because they are selling packaged ice cream and not handling open food, they are not required to be licensed through the health department, I believe.
That's good humor,
Right, that's what I'm talking about.
yeah.
We can check into that. I don't know the rules on ice cream.
Will do. Okay.
Got a lot more here. Sounds like it.
I know, when I see truck come back, I'm here tonight. I tell my kids, the police, that we have to run from it, so we don't buy ice cream, but.
You want to keep pushing that button, huh? Just keep pushing it. All right, so, I mean, for the trucks, then, when you have something out here, it would be fine because, but our restaurants that we have in a village should be asked first if it's something that they could, just like the festival, if it's something that you could do, rather than letting someone else from outside come in.
I would like to see the language that New Lenox and Plainfield use before we make that decision.
Well, we can get that from New Lenox.
We'll write out these codes for you to look at.
All right.
So if we did open that up, would that allow the ice cream trucks?
The ice cream trucks, I believe, the reason that we did not like them coming in is it was never the same person. Some of those guys were creepy as hell.
Would they have to apply for a permit, though? I mean,
They didn't apply for permits. They just came through, drove through, you listened to that horrid music until they got to the next street.
but under the new rules.
But the difference is too, food trucks are gonna have a one location, that is one spot, or the other food trucks are driving all
Yeah,
I use our streets.
right. And sometimes they're not paying attention, and what's the first thing the little kid does?
Run
They
out.
run right out in the street for it.
Never mind.
So yeah, the ice cream trucks, I mean, we did that strictly for a safety reason. Plus, you didn't, if you had one kid go out there and they decided to open up that back door and snatch the kid inside, you don't know. And it's sorry that you have to look at it that way.
That's the times we live in.
Yes.
Carrie, does Orland Park allow ice cream trucks?
No, they do not.
All right.
Okay. Let's move on to code classifications and scrivener's errors.
We're on whether or not we want to require a preliminary site plan at the time of an application for a rezoning.
Yes.
Yes. All right, so the recent petition for the rezoning of the 15029 West 143rd Street property without a preliminary plan in place opened up the discussion of whether or not the village should require a concept plan at the time a rezoning is petitioned. Currently, our code does not require any kind of concept plan at all, no preliminary plats or anything like that when someone comes in for a rezoning. In Frankfurt, their code indicates that an application for an amendment shall be filed with the code official in such a form and accompanied by information that is required by the code official. Glenview indicates the following: a complete application for an amendment, including all information as shall be required from time to time by the village, shall be filed with the Office of the Director of Development. Naperville requires the application as well as all supporting documents required by the city. So I think typically Orland has language like this too, which is just drawings as required by the village. I will just share just my 2 cents from a project that we had in Orland Park where this vague language does come into play sometimes in the future. You think it might work for you, but it may not. So if you are interested in that, I think we need to be specific. Orland was questioned about what preliminary plan was, and it was challenged legally, and it was indicated that it was too gray, our code. And so basically a preliminary plat was accepted as a preliminary plan. And so it technically, the staff wanted to see a concept plan, and that was not upheld at that time. So I think if we're interested in going that route, we need to be very specific about what we want to see. That's just my 2 cents.
And I would just like to add one more comment. Just as a reminder, and I'm a planner also by trade, is that your single biggest tool that you have in your toolbox is your zoning to power. Your zoning to rezone or not rezone. And once you make those decisions, that zoning runs forever with that piece of property. So the reason why the planning field recommends requiring at least a concept plan to be submitted, site plan to be submitted at the time of a rezoning is because they're asking, a petitioner is asking the village, whatever village it is, to give them, to use your most powerful tool you have, which is to grant that rezoning without knowing what they're planning on doing in the future. And that is why many communities do not allow a rezoning without a preliminary site plan attached to it. Now, it's preliminary because there's recognition that things change, and they have to, with those changes, they'd have to go back through the planning approval process. But your single biggest tool in the toolbox that villages have is your zoning authority.
I think this one in particular was a little bit easier to palate because as a residential rezoned property, you're very limited to what you can do on that property. It's residential uses, it has to meet the lot sizes typically unless you're granting variances. But if you're talking about a rezoning to a commercial property, we have C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6. They all have a plethora of uses and we don't know what those are. We don't know what somebody is proposing to do on those properties. And by granting them that rezoning, you're granting them the right to do everything that's permitted by right that's within that district. And so as long as you're comfortable when you're doing rezonings, allowing all of those uses to be allowed by right, then that's okay. But I think that's the thing which you get into with those kind of higher zoning districts and the commercial districts that allow so many different uses.
That was the argument I made when I feel like I'm on counterpoint all of a sudden. That was one of the arguments I made when we looked at that particular piece of property, was that I know the zoning codes. I know what the levels are, the C1 through C6, the R1 through, R6A, and what each level allows, restricts. So I looked at that piece of property and I would look at another one if it came in tomorrow and I would say, all right, well, what's the maximum they can do on that piece of property? Because if I'm comfortable with that and they come in under it, well, then I'm more comfortable. So to me, it didn't make sense to require that, somebody do that. I mean, because you talk about what is it that they're allowed by right, and by right, that piece of property we actually ended up restricting itself by what the owner had asked us to do by using our most powerful tool. He put more restrictions on himself by changing the zoning on that particular piece of property. And I fully understood that. I fully understood that, what those zoning levels were and what was allowed by what we were changing, what we were allowing it to be changed to. And I was comfortable with that. So I get that there's a lot of gray, maybe finer lines in some of the commercial stuff, and maybe that's more incumbent upon us then to make sure that we understand where those edges are on our zoning codes to make sure we've done our homework. So,
well, that's why you need a concept in some of these plans. I mean, it's just like the 6 acres off of 139th Street. I mean, that property over there. I mean, could be the max, and he was saying, oh, no, it's, it's going to be half of that. How can we rezone something and we don't even have a clue? I mean, I think what Manager Freiling said, I think we need to have something. It makes it easier to understand what they want, where they're going for, instead of just, okay, yeah, we'll rezone it, and you let us know, we'll find out. The max, oh yeah, maybe you could put 6 houses on there, maybe you can't. But I mean, I think we need something.
So he came to us and he wanted to go to a zoning code that would allow him, I believe it was 3 divisions on that because he had to have a road bisected. So that automatically made 1 division, and he was able to take the balance of that land and divide it twice. So he got 3 divisions out of that by the code that we by the zoning district that we allowed him to go into. He was kind of pigeonholed. We knew that he couldn't do more than that, and yet that was still, you thought, maybe an overreach on what he could do. We knew he could only net out 3 lots out of that.
We don't know that.
And I believe at the time you had said he should go to a higher zoning. I can't remember the exact number he was going to. Was he going to R3?
He went to
R1, or I can't remember the number he was going to. But I think at the time, Sharon, you had asked him why he's not going into E.
I think it was R1, and I think that there was a push to go to E1 or E2.
Or E2, right. 2.5 acres minimum, yeah.
So again, it was more though, from your level that you still weren't going to see, if he had said, okay, you know what, you're right, I'll go to E2, you still hadn't seen a preliminary plat or a preliminary site plan or anything, but you were comfortable going to somewhere where you knew where the boundaries were, you knew where the edges were. You just were not comfortable at the original concept that he had proposed with what you knew he could net out of that.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just a matter of, I was more comfortable with it than you were, but either way, if at the end of that day, if he had come to you and said, you know what, Trustee Suisse, you're right, I'll go to E2, you still had not seen a preliminary site plan or anything. So you still don't, so how can you say we need to see what he's preliminarily going to do? You still wouldn't have known if he had gone up to that other
Well, the
thing.
E2, well, just the zoning as E2, because it was
Right,
so
'cause
much
you knew
bigger.
that he can only get 2 out of that, maybe.
Right.
So again, it's basically the same thing. It's just a matter of, I'm a little more comfortable letting him net out 3. You were wanting him to only net out 2. So again, but at the end of that conversation, you still hadn't seen a preliminary site plan. We're still only going by what's in our current zoning about what we know is the maximum allowed in that zone. So
I think that's true for residential, but when it comes to, like Melissa was saying, the commercial aspect of it, we really don't know what they're going to do. I think when it comes to commercial rezoning, absolutely should have a preliminary concept plan. That's my take.
I support whatever makes it easier for staff. If staff is saying that this is something that they need, that I'm comfortable with that.
Agreed.
Same.
All right. Next one.
Sure.
what is it, the staff?
You were outvoted. We did not make a recommendation, but
We would like to, no, so just, we would like to require a preliminary site plan for rezoning. We think it is in the best interest of the village long-term to have that as part of rezoning, so the board has a more educated information and facts before you give away your most powerful tool.
all right. So I hope Ann comes back, because actually this was brought up by Ann. I could skip and come back. Ann had brought to the staff's attention a portion of our nonconformity section in our code that basically, it's very similar, I would say, to our new sign code, where when this is just my guess, when this was codified originally, that the idea was that these could be considered nonconformities, but they would have a certain amount of time to come into compliance or get variances and whatnot. And this is a particularly concern to Ann for single-family residential dwellings. The time period on that was 12 years from adoption. I believe, actually, based on the original adoption of the code, that this may already be sunset. I think this is done. Yeah. There's an amendment date, but I don't think that that's what it runs from. I believe it would have run from the original date of the ordinance. Yeah.
So I was approached by, one was a finance guy at a bank, and another person, he does home inspections. They're not here tonight, so I guess I have to be firmer on them to show up and speak, because they have a firsthand perspective on dealing with situations where buyers have been turned down for refinancing, buyers have walked away from a property, situations like that. And as I sat down with VJ that day and we talked about it, this would affect, if you look at the zoning map we just approved, all of the areas in Brown.
Yeah, and I think even Joe and I have talked about, like, Pebble Creek, like, the majority of those homes in that neighborhood are all nonconformities based on our current code. So I think you bring up a solid point. I want to go through this peer analysis, because actually during my research, Orland's code is very similar to this code here. So my history of working with nonconformity sections is that you do not touch the structure, you do not expand the nonconformity, period, end of story. Like, there's just no wiggle room in that. And so through my research, I actually found quite a few communities that have this in there in different ways. So I just want to read through these so that we've all read it and we're all on the same page. So Glenview separates out residential buildings that meet use regulations but not bulk regulations. So meaning that, like, the single family dwelling is a use that's allowed in your code, right? But maybe the dwelling has a setback issue or something, right? So that's a bulk regulation that's not meeting. And it allows the enlargement and the structural alteration so long as no additional nonconformity is created. So basically this would be like if your house had a side setback issue, a side setback nonconformity, you could build an addition on the rear of your house, right? So long as that doesn't create a new nonconformity and doesn't expand the actual nonconformity on that side setback. Our code, just so you guys understand, does not differentiate those two things. So our code is just, if you have a side setback, your building is a nonconformity and you may not expand it in any way. It doesn't call out that specific thing related to a specific nonconformity on the site, right? This is a very good...
One question for you.
Yeah.
Does that nonconformity, especially like in Pebble Creek, does that exist because we have done away with the underlying zoning?
Could be, absolutely.
I mean, all of those don't exist, including, I think, my neighborhood qualifies. It's because the zoning that came with the land is no longer there.
Could be.
It's been elevated to a height that I could not get to. I can't add land to my lot.
Right.
So I will never get a variance based on that.
Right. And lots are different. The lot, you've got like a lot size, that's different though. And I think that the lots, like, you're allowed to continue to use your property based on the lot sizing. That's a very different thing than the actual, what Ann is talking about, which is that homes are not able to, like, the mortgage lenders don't want to give lending to homeowners because they literally can't fix their home without going through a variance process.
Yeah, it sounds like it's just paperwork that needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm hearing you right, it seems like it's
and there are a few examples that do have some really good language that we could put in here if we were interested in adding some clauses. I think, first of all, we've removed that section that talks about the 12-year kind of sunset thing for our single-family homes, and then we look at some version of these that allow for additions, enlargements, and things to the home, as long as we're not creating new nonconformities.
Exactly, and I don't think anybody wants that. And,
Right.
And the other part was also section F, which was restoration of damaged nonconforming structures. To any extent that the cost of restoration equals or exceeds 50% of the EAV. I mean, that's pretty restrictive.
I think that's also pretty typical. 50% is very, very common for nonconformity sections if it's a damage. So if it's like, if a fire takes a home more than 50%, then that is very commonly across the board, every community I've ever pretty much seen. It's that even under those cases, you would want a new structure to come into compliance with the setbacks and those types of things.
So that's where I wanted those guys to chime in, because those were the parts that they brought up to me, and obviously that's not my, cup of tea, my area, and I don't really speak to it because I'm not even going to pretend like I know what they're talking about. So if we can get some proposed changes, before us, and I will make sure that they're at the next discussion where this is talked about.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that. We'll take some language from the other communities and plop it into a code. But I do agree with Melissa, is the general standard in the planning industry is that if there's a structure, whether it's a tornado, whether it's a fire, or some damage is done to that structure, and it was legal non-conforming prior, and more than 50% of it is damaged, it is very standard language across the entire, our field, is that 50% is the trigger, that, because typically it usually results in demolition, and then you start from the ground up and you have to come into compliance with what the existing code is. It no longer will be qualified for legal nonconformity.
And that's pretty much the same with building codes too. If it's
Yeah.
50% damage, the entire structure.
to code for building codes.
So like, say you have a house that had an addition put on years ago and it was legal non-conforming, but now we have setback rules in place, so they would not be able to build a house in the same size it was. They wouldn't be able to have that addition space that was on the house that existed as a legal non-conforming.
If it burned more than 50%, no.
But then they can, no, that's not by right, they can't.
Not by right.
They have to come through for a variance.
Right, which is very similar to that Pebble Creek project that came through, that the whole house burned down, and then we granted them a variance. It was basically in a very similar location, yeah. Are there any other comments on this section? All right, the next one is whether or not we want to remove the general restriction on hours of operation for businesses. Recently came to staff's attention while we were doing some parking analysis for the Orland Oak subdivision, that there are a significant amount of our businesses in town that are operating out of our normal hours of operation, which is the 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. I don't know if this is just over time. We didn't really dive into it too much. I just know that it's actually happening. And then we also found that there was kind of, I guess, from the public's perspective, that the restaurants that were operating outside of those, a lot of them had liquor licenses. They felt like they came in front of the board granted them a license. The license says that they can serve till whatever time, which is not 11 o'clock. And so they were just under the, you know, they just assumed that they could be operating that late. So staff talked about this with Carrie, and we've been over this and wondering whether or not we should go through the getting all of these businesses special uses, or whether or not it would be something to look at how other communities do this, and if there are other communities that actually don't regulate this at all. So we did find that let's see, Burr Ridge has the general restriction similar to ours, which is 7 to 10, unless they get a special use. Frankfurt has a general restriction from 7 to 11, unless they get a special use, similar to ours. And then Glenview, Lockport, Naperville, New Lenox, Orland Park, all do not have any general restriction. They do regulate specific uses, like the liquor licenses, for instance. So the liquor license would have its own hours of operation regulation within the code. So.
I remember us talking about this, like, you know, as a board, and I always thought it was 7 to
1 o'clock.
No, I thought it was 6 to 11, because I was actually having a conversation with somebody recently who said they were going to start serving breakfast because they have the 6 to 11 liquor license, so they could have Bloody Marys and things like that in the morning. I always thought it was 6 to 11. So if it's outside of that, it's news to me.
So is the question based on, I guess, what, is this going to be based on just general businesses or businesses with liquor licenses, or just everything
Well, the
lumped into
license
one
should carry a
bucket?
time.
Well, the liquor licenses right now is midnight, right? We have a 12 a.m. liquor?
Midnight during the week,
1 a.m.
2 o'clock on the
It's only
weekend.
7 to 11.
Right.
So you have both, and what Melissa's saying is that you have both in your hand. One says you can stay open, you can serve liquor till 2, but our general code says you have to close at
Right,
11.
they're
You got a conflict, and most of these people have.
And most of those restaurants are staying open based on the liquor license.
Right, they said.
And they didn't come through for a special use. So we have two options. We make them all come through for a special use, or you can just change the code and say if you have, your hours can be tied to your liquor license. But if there's a business that wants to come in, like, let's say we have another 24-hour business, those 24-hour businesses could still come through for a special use. That could still trigger a special use requirement, so you guys have to approve it. But we could tie the hours of operation to the liquor license, because right now I think almost all of our businesses, without naming any of them, that have a liquor license are staying open past 11 p.m., I think.
Well, they are staying open past 11 o'clock.
2 o'clock on the weekends.
have a special use, right? They don't have a special use.
Well, some could be staying open past 11 o'clock and have a special use that they did come through the process.
We do have a few
There
on file.
are places that don't have liquor licenses, though, and there's
We have a few, like,
chain with a drive-through that sometimes stays open late until 2 o'clock in the morning, serving fast food. But if they cannot come through this process to get a special use permit, they should be closing down.
Why are we limiting these, let's say, notwithstanding alcohol, why are we limiting businesses until a certain hour?
Because the current
It's
code
a policy
that's written in the
decision.
book says 11 o'clock. If you want to be open till 2 in the morning and just serve food, no gaming, no any of that, you still have to come in for a special use permit as part of your business license, the whole routine, to get that special use permit. That's a one-time deal, right? That's generally when you're establishing your business, you would know all of those things ahead of time and come in as part of the application process. Unless you changed your business over time, then you would come back for that special use. So right now, we have non-conforming. These guys are looking for a way for us to address that. I think that special use is a good route for a lot of that, because we already know that there's a lot of stuff that happens in this village after hours, after code enforcement is gone, after a lot of that. You know, there's a lot of stuff that just keeps on going on. At least it'd be nice to know a few things have been.
Yeah, I think this kind of started with a gas station.
Circle K.
Yeah, and we were like, well, we really would like to control them not selling, a bottle of Jack Daniels at 4 o'clock in the morning.
And it was they were loading at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they back up to a residential area, so the residents were complaining.
Over there.
Yeah, so there's reasons why you restrict certain things, but I mean, with the liquor license thing, you give them a license to 1 and during the week and 2 on the weekends, how do you tell them they got to close at 11?
You don't.
Well, you don't.
Come in for a
Yeah.
special use to stay open to those hours.
So we've never
Nobody's gonna
had,
restrict their liquor license. It's just that they have to come into compliance for their general business hours to be conforming to their liquor license.
Aren't special uses?
Question, because this was discussed a few years ago, and pre-your time, pre-VJ's time, and there were differing opinions on whether a special use permit was required. And one impression was that the special use went with the building, with the lease, and if they took over the lease, they did not have to come back in for a separate special use permit. So that may be where where that line got blurred. That was a specific discussion that took place by staff members.
Sounds like there's a lot of cleaning that needs to be done.
16.
this one should be 1 o'clock during the week, 2 o'clock on the weekends, and when they have
But do they have to
special.
get a special use permit to do that?
Do you want to disallow that by code instead of making all these existing businesses who are out of sync with our codes come through a special use?
Yes.
No, I'm sorry, I think.
You do want them, or you do want it, Mr. Mayor, you want them to come through the special use process or not?
I just want
Or
everyone
tie
on
it
the
to a
same
liquor
page that the
license.
bars are open to 1 o'clock Monday through Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and
Then we need, then we would have to change the code.
Or they,
Allow that.
For liquor license.
For liquor license
license.
establishments.
yeah, and then at 2 o'clock on those, and then we give them special extensions on
holidays.
Black Wednesday.
Right.
If we're going to do it special use, then we need to waive those fees to make the people come into compliance. They shouldn't have to pay the, permit fees involved with a hearing and plan commission and special use permit approval because we're fixing paperwork and things
I
that
didn't
fell
say
through the
we have to
cracks.
raise any price. All I'm looking for is to everyone be on the same page.
So do you want to change the code to reflect that? Or do you want it still require special use?
No, you can just change it.
Just change the code.
Right.
Okay.
We're not looking to charge anyone more.
Right, I would agree, I completely agree with Trustee Holtz. We don't want to go back to our businesses that have been open for however long and say, oh, by the way, you've been operating legally with your hours and now you have to pay to go through a public hearing notice. I don't think that would be business friendly, but is there consensus from the board that we go ahead and make this code change so that by right, if you hold a liquor license and your liquor license says you're allowed to serve until 1 a.m. or 2 p.m. or 2 a.m., then those are your hours of operations. And if it's anything other than that, then you still have to come through and get a special use. Now, we have to go back and check, I don't know, we'll have to go back and look at the records, because there might even be other businesses who don't have a liquor license, gas stations too, who haven't come through for a special use for hours of operations for a while. We got to clean that up. And in those cases, I agree, I don't think it's fair to go back to them and say, now you have to pay $500 to go through a special use permit.
Well, you have to have a cutoff point for selling liquor. Every
Right,
day, you have to have a cutoff point.
right, which we do in our liquor license code, but in this other code, we're more restrictive, and that's where there's been this inconsistency, which we've identified, and we've gone back and done some just checking, and we noticed that a lot of our businesses, I'm not going to name any, are, you just threw that at me, do not have, are not in compliance with both codes.
Right.
Well, to have two codes is kind of crazy, but all I'm talking about is you have your liquor establishments, like Rubens, Davidson's, Pelican Harry's.
Right, but this would, I mean, I think we're all in agreement on if you have a liquor license, your hours of operation should mimic your liquor's ability to sell liquor to what time.
Right.
But, so that's done. Liquor's out of it. Now, if I don't have a liquor, if I'm Hallmark, can I sell cards until 2 in the morning, or am I still precluded? I got to close at 11. I can't be open more than 11 o'clock, that's by our general code. Or if I want to stay open till 2 a.m. selling greeting cards, I have to come in and ask for a special use permit to stay open those extra couple hours. And that would be like any other business.
Like, I don't know, like White Castle, I mean, are they open like?
They're open, I think they're open 24/7.
Right. So they probably have a special.
No, they're not. They're seasonal. But like, for example, in my situation, let's say I'm a liquor establishment, my liquor license ends at 2. Let's say I want to open at 6 in the morning for breakfast, but I'm not allowed to sell liquor. I think there should be provisions or there should be rules for that because, maybe one day I want to sell at 6 in the morning.
Well, they started changing them at some of them, and they did it basically because people who would be watching the soccer games from another country, they start that early in the morning, and they extended it to 9 o'clock when the soccer games began.
You could serve liquor at 6.
Oh, yeah? I didn't know.
I think it starts at 6.
But some of them on Sundays was a little bit different.
I won't be there, but.
I have a question. Excuse me over there. I have a question. Okay, when it says 24 hours still needs a special use for, like, say, liquor, what are the gas stations doing right now? If they're open 24 hour, they all have alcohol. So have they come in, have they all come in for special use permits if they're going to be selling alcohol at 4 o'clock in the morning?
I haven't encountered that since I've been here.
I also we haven't done a complete analysis of, this was a very high level, I did some Google searching to see who was open, first of all, and then I did some general searching on our ordinances to see which special uses have been pulled. There's one for Jewel, one for Meijer, there's one for the Citgo that's on the corner near Jewel, there's one for McDonald's and one for Wendy's. These were all done a very, very long time ago, and it could be, Ann, that these happened and they slipped through the cracks from staff, but it also could be that a business opened, told the village staff that they were going to be open till 11, and then over time, management changed or ownership changed, and they just evolved their hours over time. It just expanded.
I know Meijer doesn't sell liquor until 2.
But they should be cutting off their sales,
They cut themselves off at midnight. They just do that. I think
though they're
some of the
open
gas
on-
stations do. They're like corporate policy.
I think they should be technically stopping sales.
They should
after
be
a certain
stopping sales
time.
according to the liquor code, and I believe they have corporate policies that are different in each one, that they have their set, but they should still be ultimately following our liquor.
rules.
Right,
So they may have 24 hours of operation, but they can't sell liquor after 2.
24 hours, right.
They should be selling it from 6 to 11, like the license says.
It's 1 and
but it's
2 in the morning.
but that's a drinking.
No,
Not
it's
a-
sale. That's what the code says.
Well, the code here, current code, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m.
That's hours of operation.
That's general hours of operation.
That's different than a liquor license. So we can go back and let us do some more
You guys
research
need to
on
bring us
this.
a lot more information, and including maybe a matrix of what complies, what doesn't, what they're doing right now,
Yeah, okay.
I know that it's difficult for the 300 and some odd.
I don't want to single out a bunch of our businesses, but what we'll do is we'll do it in categories. Like, we can look at the gas stations, we can look at the fast food, we can look at the Meijer, and then we can look at our restaurants and give you more information on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's got to clear up, because, it says here, there's an inconsistency between the zoning regulations for hours of operation and the hours of service allowed through the liquor license. Then it says current code, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., right below it.
That's business
All right,
operation.
but it doesn't say anywhere in here that you have to stop at 11, you have to stop at 12, or you just have to stop at 1. So my understanding of it is current code says 6 to 11. I don't care if a gas station sells up to 11 o'clock, but to sell at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, they're probably already lit in the first place, and they're going to be drinking on the way back home.
But what about a restaurant who wants to stay open past 11?
That's a bar that's doing it. It's not a liquor store.
It's used by you.
I want to, if they're sitting inside of a bar and a bar overserves somebody, then it's a bar's fault.
Okay.
And if you're going to be open to 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, that would be theirs. But if you're going to a gas station and you're buying the liquor, where are you going to drink it? You're going to drink it in the car. Well, you're probably already lit in the first place, so why are you? I mean, it should be, I took it for granted this was all dialed in. It's not dialed in.
We can wait if you want to go get us the information.
Yeah.
I'm just saying Sunday mornings, well, because we were talking about gas stations, we had this discussion once before. When, I believe it was Circle K or the last gas station that came through, we talked about how the limited hours are they can sell alcohol. But on Sundays, it's 10 a.m. till 1 a.m. and then on Monday through Thursday, Monday through Thursday, it's 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. and on weekends, it's 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. So you can sell liquor.
At a gas station.
But that conflicts with this code section right here.
Okay, well, we got to kind of dial them all in so we know what's what. Because, I mean, to me, there is no sense in selling someone to someone who's going to jump right back in a car and go. Because they're not going to wait till they get home to drink it. They're going to drink it while they're driving.
Okay, so we'll get more information on that.
Jim, what do you think?
Sir.
You back there sleeping? No, not quite. In just a couple days.
Okay, whatever you guys tell me to do, we will do.
Well, it makes it harder for you guys to. I mean, the bars have always
He's not
been
going to give you an
1
answer.
Whatever you want.
Whatever you
All
tell
right,
him
so
to do.
give me an answer. What do you think about the gas stations selling the liquor till 2 o'clock in the morning?
Whatever you tell me to do.
Let's, you know what, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Let's look at all this stuff.
So I got just one more curveball. Okay, so let's say you have a business that their liquor license ends at 2, correct? And then they clear their shelves at 2 o'clock, but they want to continue operations after 2, selling food, just food. Is there something for that? Is there a special permit for that?
That'd be a special use
That'd be
permit.
just like certain.
So that would be special use.
6 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Any of those restaurant owners have the right to come in and ask for a special use permit. They have to go through the process, say, this is what I'm proposing now. You know?
Well, I didn't know there was a special use permit for that. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it would have to, I don't know, I mean, we'd all have to have a discussion on how do we feel about that, because obviously that becomes the honor system and, the strongest deterrent to going outside those bounds is that you start serving alcohol until 3. And again, not, any of those persons that might come in and ask for that, you're going to lose your liquor license.
Oh, yeah.
Now, so you've always had any of those providers have always had the opportunity to come in and say, I'd like a special use permit so that I can stay open later or open earlier.
And we do that. We do that for them now.
Right, but we now have businesses operating outside of those parameters that have not gotten a special use permit, and they're just asking us, how do we go about addressing that? Do we want to bring them into compliance at our cost? Let's bring them into compliance so we continue to control the special use allocation,
right.
Or do we change the hours of operation now from 4 in the morning until 2 in the morning, or, I don't know if that works mathematically, but, do we just blanket change the hours and anybody coming in can comply, or do we continue to hold on to our cards and say, we want to issue the special use permits because we want to see what's going on?
The only time that we changed anything, and this is, we did it once in the last year, because 2 years nobody asked. Ann and I, we got called before Thanksgiving, Black Wednesday. You had it to where all the college kids were coming home from school. And everyone wants to spend more time with them. So we extended it 1 hour. We went in. I gave them a card showing it was okay to do it for that night only. And then it went back to the 1 and 2.
That's your
So,
prerogative.
I mean, we've done it with you too on it. So it's just, I don't mind. I want them to make money, but then I worked in a bar when I was younger. And some of the bars that were open, the place I was at was open till 2. You got cleaned up, and then you went to a bar in Berwyn, and they were open till 6 o'clock in the morning. And all it was people that were absolutely annihilated. That's not what we want here. So let's.
I believe that the liquor code says they're automatically granted the extra hour on the evening before the legal holiday. So those special days were for like St. Patrick's Day or days that are not a legal national holiday. That's what we did the special.
And that's your prerogative as a
Right.
liquor commissioner, that you can hand that out.
Right, and if I don't want to, I don't have to, but they've never given me any reason not to. But I mean, the last thing I want is everyone thinking, all right, now I got a 3 o'clock license. Because I mean, the only thing that's going to do is make a ton more work for these guys. I don't want them chasing down drunks. I want them to just make sure everything else is good.
I agree.
So, all right, so just if we could get that cleaned up.
Is it the last one? Oh, God. All right, this is the last one. Whether or not we want to adjust the parking requirements for restaurants from a per-seat requirement to a per-square footage requirement. Requiring parking for seating and per employee is less concrete.
Per seat.
Oh, sorry about that. Less concrete to regulate and enforce, as seating plans can easily be manipulated and numbers of employees can fluctuate. Like post approvals. APA recommendations, currently, just from our planning association, is actually there's been a really big push to remove minimums altogether. That's not what staff is recommending. We were just including that just so you guys kind of understand where the planning field is going. The Urban Land Institute indicates 2.5 cars per 1,000 square feet of suburban application, kind of over, it would be like an average application. So that, just so you understand that, like the one that we're looking at that we see the most for restaurants for square footage would be 10 for 1,000 square feet, and our code for the rest of our uses is 4 for 1,000. So on an average, it would probably come in somewhere around that anyways, I think. Our current code, restaurant full service is 1 space per 3 seats of total capacity, plus 1 per employee for the work shift with the largest number of employees. And then restaurant fast food is 1 space per 3 seats, plus 1 space per employee for the work shift with the largest number of employees, plus on-site queuing for your drive-throughs. For our peer community analysis, Frankfurt is 1 per 100 square feet, plus 1 per the employee. Glenview is 1 parking space for 3 people or seats, based on the maximum number of occupant load. Orland Park is 1 per 100 square feet plus the stacking if it's drive-through. Naperville is 10 per 1,000, which is the same thing, 1 per 100. New Lenox is 1 parking space for 1,000 square feet plus 1 parking space for employee. And then Lockport is 6 spaces for parking space for each 75 square feet of floor area, but never less than 10. So right off the bat, you just get 10 there. And then staff put together this just to kind of show you where our businesses sit. It's just like kind of it's whatever we could pull together right now. And then what the seats are, the square footage, and what the parking would be required based on our current code. And then based on, the first one is based on square footage, and then the second one is based on our current code, which is the seating plus in the areas where it says just plus employees, it was because I didn't have employee numbers for those. So we just so you understand, like the first one at the top, Blueberry Hill, they have 6,000 square feet, they have 240 seats. Parking based on square footage would be 60. On our current code, that would require 80 parking spaces plus their employees at the largest shift during the day.
George, it's a new business that hasn't opened yet.
Okay. Thanks.
I like the one we currently have because I look at a lot of these and the parking is so limited when you go there anyway. I don't want to name names, but it's hard to find spots in some of these places already, and to give that up is a lot.
I don't know, my opinion is, and call me ignorant, but what is the benefit of regulating this? I mean, if I can't find a parking space, I'll just go down the street somewhere else.
I think mostly it's to do with like shopping centers. So when we've had a shopping center where if we just keep letting restaurant uses have X amount of spaces, then it's going to hurt everybody. Because that's what's going to happen is now people are going to be like, well, I'm not going to go there anymore because there's never any parking. So it kind of regulates usage and parking spaces. So like the Hallmark store, she's probably just going to have one employee there, but definitely, or two, but definitely more than 2 employees. So you don't really have that concern. I think there's a really good example. We went through this with Blueberry Hill is because we had restaurant people coming in and we were trying to make sure, listen, we don't want to hurt Blueberry Hill by putting in another restaurant, and now this guy doesn't have any parking, but we were comfortable with it because it was 2 different uses. It was a lunch crowd or a dinner crowd versus a breakfast crowd.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be kind of more up to the property owner? Because, for example, we had a potential, I don't know if it was a pub or a gastro brewery.
It's a microbrew? A microbrew?
Microbrewery. They went to another town because we wouldn't let them in because of parking requirements. I don't know. I mean,
And where was this at?
it was actually my plaza.
Where Enzo's and everyone used to be?
Right. They were
By Ruby Agave.
by Ruby Agave. Yeah.
Oh, Enzo's did
Well,
used to be over
but
there.
further, but further
Oh,
down.
I forgot they were over there
Yeah,
before.
Enzo's
Right.
salsa place. Then you had I don't know, you had construction.
I just think those kind of things kind of work themselves out instead of us.
I don't think
It
so.
really plays towards new construction and development though. Like when you're building
A new building.
right, like they may want to build a 6,000 square foot building and go, I'm good with just putting in 200 parking spaces. That's not good planning. That's
Right.
greedy. They don't want to spend the money on infrastructure or the groundwork that it takes to put in a parking lot.
And in a case like yours, which you would just explain, most of the time on the weekends, you always have a hard time finding parking spots. And, plus with it being so dark over there, you can't tell what's open and what's not open. So,
Don't get me started on the dark part, but just my whole thing, I think that we should focus, I don't know, more on, maybe leaning more on the property owners to maintain these parking lots and perhaps, because I think there we are very lax. There we are very lax.
I would think that they should be, because if you decide to leave to go to somewhere else because you're not getting business in, who does it hurt? Well, it hurts you and it hurts him.
Exactly.
It is hard to do those two because a lot of these properties are held in trusts. So you're trying to track down a trust person, right, Joe? Which is like I'm not gonna say where mine's at, but it was impossible. I'm paying in these association fees every month, and no matter what, I'm paying in my fee, and he's not making the repairs. And that's when the village then steps in and goes, okay, we're gonna make the repairs, but now we gotta go after a trust, just often hard to find, or a property management company that is gone under, and now it's going through the courts, and the courts got, it is horrible, but I totally agree, because some of these parking lots are a wreck.
Where's Cervantino's?
They're going into the 2 spaces directly to the left of Enzo's.
Oh,
You're looking out from Enzo's. So where Sal's Phillies used to be in the space right now.
Gotcha. Okay.
And Mugshots is going to be down at the other end of that plaza.
So I hear you guys talking a lot about not wanting to create a situation where we're not providing enough parking, potentially. But I think at the end of the day, if I'm just curious if there's still potentially an appetite at all for square footage, and maybe there is just a different threshold for us that's maybe would require more parking than what we're seeing at these other peer communities. Maybe it's not the 1 per 100. Maybe it's something different than that we feel more comfortable with, that might be a little bit more consistent with what our seats are. I think that the issue from staff's perspective is that this is very difficult, not just for the planners, but it makes it complicated for planners to do the reviews and whatnot, but that's not that big of a deal. But more or less, like code enforcement and from the building standpoint, things change over time. The businesses will change what they're doing within the space, and so if you can't control the seating that's happening inside of those restaurants, the capacity is still going to drive the parking demand at the end of the day. So
one of my biggest thoughts on this, I hate parking in shopping centers on these big box stores. Almost, I'd say probably 90% of the restaurants that we have in town are not purpose-built buildings for a restaurant. They are mostly tenants, to your point, it's a tenant in a strip mall of some sort or another shopping. So you're going to impose something either bigger or smaller as far as parking goes. And in time, that can become the Hallmark I referenced earlier or something else, where now all of a sudden the parking that's out front has no relation to the business that's there anymore. So in a purpose-built, a Chili's or something of that nature, you have a little more argument, I think, about, you can definitely say this is dialed in as this. Mm-hmm. My biggest thing is, and I'd like to look at more than this, to be honest with you, this just doesn't, it doesn't like jump up there for me. But when you have these bigger big box stores and you have a sea of paving out in front of it that's basically for the Thursday of Thanksgiving or the Friday after, the worst possible case day of the year. And let's face it, parking is always going to be horrible on those days. But the other 364 days of the year, that is just a sea of concrete and paving out there that, they have to maintain to the Environment Committee's sensitivities. It's pervious surface, that's out there, or impervious surface, I'm sorry. To me, the restaurant portions of this, I think, is while I've worked some of these numbers by these things, and to be honest with you, some of them don't add up. I don't think we've factored in some of the queuing for some of these that have drive-throughs and things like that. Some were more restrictive, some were more lenient than others. So I don't think that this is where the bigger argument or the bigger impact is going to be as far as large parking and more parking than is absolutely necessary.
All right, Melissa, we got anything else?
So I don't know if you guys want me to go through this list. These are the other code updates that we will likely be addressing. We didn't feel these were warranted for slides of policy discussion, unless for some reason you guys wanted to pull these off and have a quick conversation about them. Do you want me to read through them, or yes? No? Okay.
Yeah, I think we've heard enough tonight.
Well, just put a copy of them in our box.
Okay.
All right. We're all set there. Is there any old business? Is there any new business?
Mayor, I'd have a quick point of privilege, and I promise you this is not due to this workshop tonight, but I'd like to read a letter into the record and then give it to you, Mayor. Dear Mayor and Board, earlier this year I accepted a new position as Chief of Staff in the Illinois State Senate. While it's a great professional opportunity for my family and I, it also requires a substantial amount of travel and time away from home. In my new role, I direct more than 100 staff and the operations of many senators, including the Senate Minority Leader. Most of our employees are based at the Capitol in Springfield, and our schedule revolves around the legislative session calendar, which I do not control. I provide you that information as background because the combination of those responsibilities and the requirement for me to be in Springfield when the legislature is in session will prevent me from attending the next several months of board meetings in addition to our CED meetings. I've waited until now in hopes that the schedule would change and allow me to attend some of our upcoming board meetings, but that does not seem likely at this point. I believe the residents of Homer Glen deserve someone that can continue representing their interests over the next several months and attend important meetings. So it is with some sadness that I will be stepping down as village trustee in the next couple weeks. It's been one of the great honors of my life to serve the residents of our community these last 5 years, and I am enormously proud of the many things we've accomplished together for Homer Glen. I have had the great privilege to build friendships with many of you in the time I've been trustee, and I'm immensely grateful for that chance. I'm especially thankful to our wonderful staff that all work really hard for our residents and often do the jobs of 2 or 3 people. I could not be more proud of the great team they have become. At my first board meeting in 2015, I was asked why I wanted to be a trustee and serve the community. By trustee, nice to try. I said at the time because I believed there was still nobility in public service, and I wanted to set a good example for my kids. As I sit here today, I still absolutely believe there is nobility in public service for people of character, and I can only hope that through my service and conduct over the last 5 years, that I have set a worthy example for my kids. All the best, signed, me.
Well, I thank you very much, Brian. You've been one. I think that what you said is 100% true. We have changed a lot of things. Everything goes a lot smoother. We're making leaps and bounds on a lot of things that we've wanted to do in this village, and you have definitely, between this and the park and everything else, you've been a great help, and I know myself will definitely miss you, but I do totally understand what you're getting into, and I would never ever want to get in your way there.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for doing what you have done for us.
It's been an honor.
Mayor, if I could, I'd like to just say that when I first met Trustee Burien, I was a resident, and you guys had just started up. You were relatively new in your first terms, and you had reconstituted the CED, the Community Economic Development Committee, and you had put out a call for volunteers to come and volunteer for that. And I submitted my application and my resume, and was very, I had a lifetime of volunteering, sitting on boards, things of that nature. So I knew what I was getting into, but you're always apprehensive when you first, go and see a bunch of new people. I'd never been in the mayor's office, and I was in your office that night, so I was a little bit nervous. But after, first couple meetings of CED, we really hit a nice stride and everything, and it was because of Trustee Burien and yourself, Mayor, that I stayed with it, and I thought, you know what, I want to go on. I do want, I knew that Trustee Holtz at the time had kind of given Brian the business about why he wanted to volunteer and do that. But it's a laudable goal to say that, this is noble work. We all know this is not, it's not easy. It's not hard. It's not like we're digging ditches or, anything like that. It's not easy, but it's not hard. It's something else. And it's something that people that have gone through this understand. It's that kind of like nod, yeah, I got it. I know what you're going through, And you guys made it look easy, and you made it look welcoming, and you made it look worthwhile. So that was why I ended up running for my seat. So I appreciate the influence you put up upon me, Brian. So, and I'll miss you. So you've been a great colleague.
Thank you.
I'm hopeful that we'll gain from your time in Springfield, and I'm sure that we'll hear from you in the next coming years and gain some insight into what's going on down there and work together. Hopefully maybe this will help us maybe get closer to Springfield and get ahead of some things that happen there, or
Well, I'd like to say, Brian, I know we've had our differences, but you're a good guy, and I know that you're looking to do the right thing, and anything that you go above and beyond to do, you'll do just great. And anything I can do for you, just ask, because I'm there.
I agree.
Trustee Burien, I just want to say thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure working with you.
It's been an honor, and it's been a pleasure to work with everybody here.
Just say quick too, Brian. I'll make it real fast. A pleasure. You've always had our back. You've always been very down to earth with us. and completely supportive of our operations, and I can't thank you enough. You're class act.
All right, we're not going to go into executive session. So I need a motion to adjourn.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.